the round mound of rebound. What made Charles so great is because you always hear the term size doesn't matter. And for Charles Barkley, size did not matter. You know, as a center, centers are always 6'10", 6'11", 7 foot. Power forwards are always 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". Not Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley was a solid 6'4", and he didn't care if you were taller, if you were bigger, if you were faster, you were stronger. He was going to go through it, and nothing could stop this man.
We lost game one because we were so nervous. But game two, I played as well as I could play.
Barkley from the outside. Barkley.
And Michael just outplayed me. That was probably the first time in my life that I felt like there was a better basketball player in the world than me, to be honest with you. I have no problem losing to Michael. Losing to Michael, there's no shame in that. Sports are like a gunfight. And we lost to the fastest gun.
Sir Charles, the round mound of rebound. I assume you guys don't need me to tell you that Charles Barkley was one of the all-time greats, and that he's in the argument for the title of the greatest player to never win a championship ring. The thing is, I think someone can be well aware of those things while not giving Chuck the proper amount of respect and credit that he deserves. The main reason I say this is because there's one jaw-dropping aspect of his game that basically no one ever talks about. Now I'll get into that one in a little bit, but let me first explain the basics of what made Sir Charles so special. Despite the fact that Barkley was an undersized power forward who was somewhere between the range of 6'4" to 6'6" tall, he was still able to play the game like a bull in a china shop. In his youth, he was a terrifying combo of speed and power, while possessing an underrated handle of the basketball that enabled him to excel in transition. Barkley was also the epitome of efficiency, as he was often making around 60% of his shots in his prime years, while consistently being a top 10 scorer in the league. He was also one of the greatest rebounders, not just for his size, not just for his era, but he was one of the best overall in league history. At his rebounding best in 1987, Barkley was averaging a monstrous 14.6 rebounds per game, while simultaneously filling up the stat sheet in a multitude of ways. One of my favorite lesser-known details about Charles Barkley is the fact that he was the true MVP of the greatest basketball team ever assembled. Yes, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird basically hogged all of the attention for the 1992 Dream Team. But ask any honest person who was watching those Olympic Games, and they'll tell you that Barkley was the best player on the court, as he led the team in scoring by far, while hitting an insane 71% of his shots and a stupid 87.5% of his three-point shots. If the Olympic MVP award had existed back then the 92 award certainly would be in his possession. But now, let's get to the part that almost no one ever talks about, but is the aspect that really deserves your respect. You never hear about it, but Charles Barkley was the epitome of a big game performer. People usually don't connect those dots because the unfortunate reality is that he never won a championship. So people make assumptions that he didn't perform his best when it mattered the most. But that simply wasn't the case. As you saw in the intro, Charles Barkley said in his own words that he lost to the fastest gun, which is an understatement considering that Michael Jordan is the fastest gun in NBA history. In that 1993 NBA Finals, Michael Jordan had arguably the greatest final series of all time, as he averaged an efficient 41 points, 8.5 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals, while torching an NBA All-Defender in Dan Marley. Understandably, Michael Jordan's play completely overshadowed Barkley's championship-worthy performance, as he averaged 27 points, 13 rebounds, and 5.5 assists on 48% shooting. This wasn't the only time that Jordan and Barkley met up in the playoffs either. Every single time Jordan and Barkley clashed in the NBA postseason, Barkley came through and put up video game numbers. In the 1990 Eastern Conference semifinals, Chuck averaged 24 points, a monstrous 17 rebounds, and 5 assists, while making 52% of his shots. Then in the 1991 Eastern Conference semis, he averaged 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 5.5 assists on a stellar 64% shooting. Against just about any other star in NBA history, Charles Barkley would have shined the brightest in each of these series. But tragically, it was against Michael Jordan, and this is what MJ did against Barkley. This is how a player can give a championship-level performance while ending up 0-3 against one other player in the playoffs. Usually, I'm not very big into making excuses for guys who ended their careers without a championship ring. But if there's one guy who, quote, ring culture is unfairly applied against, then it's Charles Barkley. Imagine having one of the greatest playoff series that your position has ever seen for 3 straight playoff appearances, and each and every time it resulted in an elimination, simply because you had the unfortunate luck of peaking at the same time as the GOAT. Shaquille O'Neal loves holding these rings over Barkley's head, but he should probably keep in mind that he wasn't winning any of those rings while Jordan was in his prime either. One of the most interesting player arcs in basketball is when a guy experiences his prime well before the typical age of a peaking player. Guys like Blake Griffin, Tyreek Evans, and Dwight Howard experienced the prime of their careers in their early 20s rather than their late 20s. Because of this, some younger fans may have never been aware just how excellent that player actually was during his prime. My favorite example of this is without a doubt Chris Paul. This eventual Hall of Famer is about to enter his 21st season in the NBA. If you ask me, his prime was definitely around 2008 to 2009, when he was a member of the New Orleans Hornets. So think about it. Even though this guy is an active player today, unless you're at least 28 years old, you never really witnessed a prime Chris Paul performing at a high level on a nightly basis. And as someone who did, let me tell you, this guy was different. Chris Paul in his early 20s had me convinced that he would end up as one of the greatest players of all time. We all know Chris Paul today as a savvy veteran with an extremely high basketball IQ. But back then, he still had that, but it was mixed with amazing athleticism, quickness, and speed. He was mesmerizing, both offensively and defensively. During that era, as a Lakers fan, we always struggled at defending elite point guards. So every time we played against him, I knew CP3 was about to put up a monstrous stat line. In the 2007 to 2008 season alone, the Hornets played against Kobe and the Lakers 4 times. In their first matchup, he dropped 19 points, 21 assists, and 3 steals. In their second matchup, he had 32 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds. In their third matchup, he had 27 points, 17 assists, and 4 steals. And in their final matchup of the season, he had 15 points, 17 assists, 6 rebounds, and 4 steals. Maybe now, you guys are starting to see why I thought CP3 was going to win the MVP that year instead of Kobe Bryant. In that season alone, he had 21 games with at least 15 assists, and 10 games with at least 5 steals. He was doing things that I didn't even know was possible in that era of basketball. And remember, he was doing all of this at 22 years old. One of his best nights was in a 2-point victory over Steve Nash and the Phoenix Suns, where he dropped 42 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, and 8 steals, while making 55% of his shots. Think about this for a second. A 22-year-old went into Phoenix and outperformed a recent 2-time MVP winner with one of the most impressive stat lines that we've ever seen from the point guard position. We were all stunned by the thought of what he could become, because considering his age, it was completely fair to assume that he was only getting better from here on out. If you had asked me in 2008 to make a prediction about Chris Paul, I probably would have told you that the GOAT debate for the point guard position would eventually be between him and Magic Johnson specifically. On top of all of this, CP3 was clutch. There was no injury history at this time, no evidence of him choking in the playoffs or anything like that. He had the stats, he had the playmaking, he had the defensive tenacity, and we all saw him as a killer who could potentially have multiple championship trophies in his future. Now, he basically maintained that same level of production in the 2008 to 2009 season and was quickly establishing himself as a big game performer, as he was seemingly always having his best performances against other Western Conference contenders. In a victory against the Mavericks, he had 31 points, 17 assists, 9 rebounds, and 2 steals, on a remarkable 73% shooting from the field. In a matchup with the Lakers, he had 21 points, 16 assists, 5 rebounds, and 4 steals, on 50% shooting. In a victory against OKC, he poured in 29 points, 16 assists, 10 rebounds, and 3 steals, on 65% shooting. Then again, against the Suns, he dropped 29 points, 16 assists, and 7 rebounds on 45%. Within a span of 2 weeks, he came dangerously close to achieving the historic quadruple-double, twice. Against the Mavericks on January 12th, he had 33 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds, and 7 steals, on 50% shooting. And then, 12 days later, against the 76ers, he had 27 points, 15 assists, 10 rebounds, and 7 steals, on 54% shooting from the field. I say this with complete conviction. We never saw a better version of Chris Paul than what we witnessed at the age of 22 and 23. Now, some speculate why that's the case, and might suggest that he didn't have the greatest conditioning or work ethic, but I really don't agree with that idea. Personally, I think it might have to do with the fact that he tore his meniscus in February of 2010. His recovery time was during the 2010 All-Star break, and this is what some of the game's greatest stars had to say about him in his absence.
He just doesn't have any weaknesses, man. I mean, he's tough, he's hard-nosed. He's a modern-day Isaiah Thomas.
He's everything, a coach dreams, because he can, not only play, but he can lead a team. He's a coach out there on the floor.
He's, for me, the best point guard in the game. His ability to score so effectively and obviously set people up is amazing.
He's just got the heart of a champion. He just doesn't back down from anything. You can say he has a small man's complex, because he just has a chip on his shoulder.
He's a winner, so he's got all the attributes, and he's going to have a phenomenal career.
Now get this, the Hornets were in the midst of a playoff rush when he tore his ligament. So because of this, they kind of rushed CP3 back into action after a small rehab process.
Tough, really tough, because I love to play all day, every day anyway, so as soon as possible. Doc said 4 to 6 weeks, so I'm just trying to do my rehab as much as possible.
Hornets fans feel they deserve their man back soon. Chris Paul hopes to oblige sooner than later.
In total, he missed just about 6 weeks of playing time before he was back out there on the court. Now, these were his averages that season before the injury, and these were his averages that season after he returned from injury. As you can see, it was a night and day difference. I think this torn ligament in his knee and the rush to get him back out there on the court actually ruined much of his speed, quickness, and explosiveness. Based on what I saw, Chris Paul always seemed like a slower version of himself after the injury, and at the very least, the numbers seem to back this up. These were his averages at the age of 23 in the 2008 to 2009 season, which was his last full season before the injury. After Paul returned to the court, he would play at least 16 more seasons in the NBA, yet he would never again be a 20 points per game scorer. He would never again average at least 11 assists per game. He would never again average more than 2.5 steals. And he would never shoot at least 50% from the field over the course of a season. Sure, he was still elite, but he would never return to that mesmerizing GOAT point guard trajectory that he had in his early 20s. To put it simply, if you didn't see Chris Paul in his early years, then you never got to experience the real CP3.
The only way you can differ him is from championships. Remember that? When he hit like 4 threes in like 5 seconds, remember that? T-Mac was a bad boy too, but he didn't really have enough room to operate. So I agree with what T-Mac said. Probably get a lot of flack, but I always say to myself, I think I could have got 3 in a row with T-Mac. I think I could have got 2 with Vince. Oh, I know I get 6 with Steph.
So obviously, you all just heard what Shaq had to say, and I do think some people are overreacting to Shaq's comments, because the reality is, Shaq is usually one of the biggest advocates for Kobe's legacy, especially since he passed away. He's always inserting him into the GOAT conversation, and is the guy who is typically sticking up for his legacy. But on the other hand, Shaq is definitely a really confident person in himself, and is gonna say that he could have won with just about anyone. Being a pro athlete means being a competitive person, so he can't act super surprised when guys act extremely competitive. Regardless, I still think his comments are BS. What I don't understand is why these hypotheticals are always working against Kobe and never in Kobe's favor. For example, what if Kobe Bryant played with Tim Duncan, a guy who has 15 all-defense teams instead of Shaq's 3? Kobe also wouldn't have needed to convince Duncan to stay in shape and make his free throws, like he had to do with Shaq. Kobe easily wins 5 or 6 championship rings with Tim Duncan. See how easy that was? See how hypocritical these Shaq hypotheticals are? Another aspect that people are not considering is where Kobe was at when he was teammates with Shaq. During their first title run, Kobe was only 21 years old. In their second, he was 22, and in their third, he was just 23. Now, Shaq said he would have won 6 championships if Steph Curry was his teammate instead of Kobe. You know what Steph was doing at that same age? At 21, Steph averaged 17 points per game. At 22, he averaged 18, and at 23, he averaged 15. During those years, he was not an all-star, he was not an all-NBA player, and had no accolades to his name whatsoever. And that's the guy that Shaq's supposed to win 6 championships with? Why does Shaq get the luxury of playing with a prime Steph in this hypothetical scenario when Kobe wasn't even in his prime when he played with Shaq? I mean, just imagine if a prime Kobe had been teammates with a prime Shaq. Instead of Kobe being teammates with Shaq between the ages of 18 and 25, what if he had been teammates with him between the age of 24 and 31? They're definitely winning a lot more than 3 rings in that scenario. But that's not what we're talking about, because for some reason, these what ifs always work against Kobe rather than for Kobe. Now let's just play along with this stupid hypothetical for a minute. Let me remind you all that Kobe was not simply a passenger when he was teammates with Shaq, but during the playoffs, there were times where he came through massively for his team just when they needed it. And you can't simply assume that Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, or Steph Curry could have been pulling off that same feat at that same age. For example, how about the game winner against Phoenix in the first round of the 2000 playoffs? How about the fourth quarter against the Portland Trailblazers in the 2000 Western Conference Finals in Game 7? It was Kobe who led the Lakers in scoring during that fourth quarter, and who led them to that 15-point comeback. And if the Mamba doesn't step up in that moment, then the Lakers don't win that game and they don't win that series. There's a reason why Bob Costas said this while calling the game.
It's Kobe again.
It's because Kobe was the one who was coming through time and time again in that fourth quarter. How about in the 2001 Western Conference Finals in their crucial matchup against the San Antonio Spurs? Kobe averaged 33, 7, and 7 on 51% shooting against that San Antonio team, who did have the #1 ranked defense in the league that season. And are we simply going to assume that a 22-year-old Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, or Steph Curry would have done that same thing on that same stage against that same level of competition? That's not a safe assumption to make. I could go on and on with these postseason examples, but the fact of the matter is that we're getting to the point where these hypotheticals involving Shaq are just getting silly. Now, was he the most physically dominant player in NBA history? Sure, but it's not like he was a player without any weaknesses, and it's not like he was a guy who could win with just any star. If that was the case, then why didn't he win with Penny Hardaway? Remember, Shaq was an absolute monster in Orlando, and if he wasn't quite as good as he was with the Lakers, then he was pretty damn close. By 1994, Shaq was averaging 29 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 blocks, while leading the league in field goal percentage. The very next season, Shaq had similar numbers while leading the NBA in scoring. Now listen, a lot of young fans don't understand who Penny Hardaway was before the injuries. In 1996, Hardaway finished third in the MVP voting, ahead of Akeem Olajuwon, Karl Malone, Gary Payton, who did make the NBA Finals that year, and even ahead of his teammate Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq had that guy on his team instead of Kobe, and it resulted in them getting swept out of the playoffs. Now, to a certain extent, I understand why Shaq is making these comments, but with that being said, I do find it annoying because it seems like he's not appreciative of the impact that Kobe had during their championship runs. More than any other tandem in NBA history, Shaq and Kobe should have been appreciating each other while they were both alive. And the reason I say this is simple, because at their peak as a tandem, Shaq and Kobe were the greatest 1-2 punch in NBA history, and I don't think it's particularly close. Kobe and Shaq's claim to fame should be the fact that they were a dynasty while their star core was only made up of just 2 players. Seriously, think about how unique that is for just a minute. Michael Jordan's Bulls in the 1990s. They had a clear number 1 in Michael Jordan. They had a clear number 2 in Scottie Pippen, and then they had their clear number 3 in Horace Grant. And then for their second three-peat, it was Jordan, then Pippen, then Rodman. How about the San Antonio Spurs dynasty? They had their clear number 1 in Tim Duncan, their number 2 in Tony Parker, and then their third option in Manu Ginobili. How about the Miami Heat? They had LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and then Chris Bosh. The Golden State Warriors had a number 1 in Steph, a number 2 in Klay Thompson, and then a number 3 in Draymond Green. The thing is, Shaq and Kobe were so dominant as a tandem that they won all 3 of their championships without a clearly defined third star / third option. In 2000, it might have been Glenn Rice. In 2001, maybe you could say it was Derek Fisher. And in 2002, it was Robert Horry, maybe? That's what made Shaq and Kobe so special, is that their championship dynasty core was just Shaq and Kobe. And yes, they had role players that obviously contributed, but being able to win 3 straight championships and making the NBA Finals 4 times as teammates, when you two are the only stars on the team, that should be your claim to fame, and that's something that you should definitely respect and appreciate about one another until your last breath. Once upon a time, on June 15th, 2003, Tim Theodore Duncan played one of the greatest games ever seen in the history of basketball. But what if I told you that if his stats from this performance had been tracked correctly, then this game from the Big Fundamental could be widely seen today as the greatest single performance in NBA Finals history. So here's what you really need to know. Duncan was dominating the New Jersey Nets in the 2003 NBA Finals in such a way that we had never seen a power forward dominate on the game's biggest stage. Over the course of the 6-game series, Duncan averaged an absolutely absurd 24.2 points, 17 rebounds, 5.3 assists, 1 steal, and 5.3 blocks on 49.5% shooting, which is obviously one of the most jaw-dropping stat lines in playoff history. But the championship-clinching 6th game was the real cherry on top. The Spurs won the game 88-77, and in that contest, Duncan had a mesmerizing stat line of 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks on 47.4% shooting. Now already on surface level, it's clear that this performance has an argument for being the greatest performance in playoff history, let alone finals history. But it was very close to being even more special than just that. With his 8 blocks, Duncan was only a total of 2 block shots away from the illustrious quadruple-double. Since blocks and steals began being tracked in 1973, there have been a total of 4 quadruple-doubles in NBA history. One was by Nate Thurmond, one was by Alvin Robertson, one by Akeem Olajuwon, and one by David Robinson. The thing is, every single one of these quadruple doubles happened in a regular season game, meaning that there has never, ever been a quadruple double performance in the NBA playoffs. But what if I told you that there should have been? According to an endless amount of videos and articles online, the common belief on the internet seems to be that Tim Duncan should have been credited with a quadruple double in his championship clinching performance. Essentially, it comes down to these 8 blocked shots. The story is that the game's statistician incorrectly tracked Duncan's blocks, and should have given him an additional 2 blocks, thus giving Timmy the quadruple double. Now here's the thing, this isn't like some mythical performance from Wilt Chamberlain, where we have no footage of his amazing game, and are left to speculate about the truth of the matter. But rather, we have the entire performance from Duncan on film. So theoretically, it shouldn't be hard to get a definitive answer on the situation. Let's start by looking at his 8 verified block shots. These are them being displayed on your screen now. So I think we can all agree that these confirmed blocks look pretty legit. But now is where things get really interesting, because now we're looking at the plays that allegedly should have been counted as blocks as well for Tim Duncan. The first was midway into the third quarter. Kerry Kittles is attacking the basket, and after receiving contact, Kittles releases the ball before it was deflected out of bounds by Tim Duncan. Just to be clear, there was no foul called on this play. Now, according to the NBA, this did not count as a blocked shot for anyone on the court because this was not registered as a shot attempt for Kerry Kittles, meaning that Duncan's deflection was just that, a deflection, and not a blocked shot. This seems like complete and utter nonsense to me though, because if Kittles wasn't shooting the basketball, then what was he doing? If you ask me, it was clear that Kittles was shooting the ball because he had just received contact and launched the ball at an upwards angle towards the rim, as if he was trying to earn a trip to the free throw line. What's amazing is that even ABC's commentators agreed with me during the play, including the legendary big man Bill Walton, who knows a thing or two about blocked shots.
I don't know if that was considered a shot attempt, but it's Duncan that knocked it out of there.
That's absolutely a block shot.
Then he's got 6 in my book.
So now I think we can all agree that Tim Duncan legitimately deserved at least 9 blocked shots. But now let's look at the alleged 10th block, which is what he needed for the quadruple double. This one happened with just under 5 minutes left in the third quarter. Richard Jefferson gets the basketball at the top of the key. He drives the lane and then drops a bounce pass to Kenyon Martin, who goes up for the shot, which is then blocked by either David Robinson or Tim Duncan. Now it's hard to tell definitively, but based on this footage, it looks like Tim Duncan gets to it first and gets his hand over the top of the basketball. I'll zoom in, slow it down, and give you time to look at it for yourself. Based on this specific highlight, from this specific angle, many YouTubers have claimed that this was clearly a blocked shot by Tim Duncan, and he should have been credited with the stat instead of Robinson. But I don't think it's that simple, because what most people don't realize is that there's actually another available angle on this shot. Usually, the NBA puts out an annual movie/documentary based on the season of the championship winner. This is the one from 2003 dedicated to the San Antonio Spurs title run. And on this one, which I have watched in its entirety, there is actually baseline footage of this play. Take a look. Now on this one, it is pretty clear that Duncan got to Kenyon Martin first. But although Duncan may have got a piece of the basketball, Martin did not release the shot just yet. But instead, he regathered it before he eventually releases it where it's sent back by seemingly David Robinson. From this angle, I can't possibly see how this block could have been Duncan's, as the follow-through of his arm is going in the exact opposite direction of where the ball is sent flying. So from a physics standpoint, it only makes sense that David Robinson was actually the one who blocked this shot. So at the end of the day, as much as it pains me to say it, I do think he fell just short of the quadruple-double, even if his stats had been accurately calculated. Yes, the statistician was wrong, but instead of his stat line being 21, 20, 10, and 8, it should have been 21, 20, 10, and 9. In actuality, since blocks and steals have been tracked, there has still never been a player in NBA history who's achieved a quadruple-double in the NBA playoffs. But at the end of the day, does it really matter? Even without that quadruple-double accomplishment on his resume, there is still no question that this was one of the select few greatest performances of all time, and quite possibly the greatest performance that the league has ever seen in a championship-clinching game.
Jordan. Oh, a spectacular move by Michael.
I know that you've all seen this iconic image, and this iconic highlight from Michael Jordan. Here's the thing. Anytime this highlight pops up nowadays on social media, you will find commenters in the thread saying that the play is overrated, that it wasn't anything special, and that modern players have done things similar or way more impressive, and that we only make a big deal about it because it was from Michael Jordan. Although I do find these reoccurring comments very annoying, I can't really blame younger fans for thinking these things, because there's just no way that they could really understand the context and the magnitude of the moment, unless someone explained it to them in detail. So that's what I'm doing today, as I'm telling you the story and the significance behind the most iconic layup of Michael Jordan's career. In June of 1991, the NBA audience was preparing itself to see a dream matchup in the NBA Finals, Magic versus Michael. The two biggest stars in the NBA and the top two MVP finalists of the league were set to square off on the game's biggest stage. Magic was 1 year removed from being the league MVP, and as a guy who was the face of 1980s basketball, he won 5 NBA championship rings during that decade. So in reality, Magic's legacy was already firmly established in a very positive light. You could even go as far as saying that he had nothing left to prove on the basketball court. On the other hand, there was Michael Jordan. Now, although MJ was already being celebrated for his transcendent talent, there was still something missing from his legacy and reputation. He wasn't widely regarded yet as a winner. You see, at this point in time, people had a different idea of what it took to win championships. Throughout the vast majority of NBA history, it had been the facilitators and team first players who won the championships, and not the scoring leaders. In the 1960s, Wilt Chamberlain was breaking scoring records, but it was Bill Russell who won most of the championships. In the 1980s, players like Dominique Wilkins, Alex English, and Adrian Dantley were winning the scoring titles, but it was first-team leaders like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson who were winning all of the NBA titles. So with this being the case, a widespread narrative was established that leading scorers don't win championships. Team leaders do. Many people were using this as a criticism against Michael Jordan, that he's a one-man show, that he doesn't include his teammates enough, and that he'll ultimately never be as successful as Magic and Bird. Think about it. Michael Jordan was 28 years old at that point in time, yet he still didn't have a single championship ring. At that same age, Magic Johnson already had all 5 of his championship rings, and Larry Bird had 2. So relatively to his elder competitors, Jordan was behind schedule, and much of the basketball world started to speculate that it was due to a flaw in his leadership and approach. These were the narratives heading into the 1991 NBA Finals. Yes, both stars were beloved and admired on a large scale, but without question, Jordan had a monkey to get off his back, while Magic did not. The conclusion of Game 1 didn't help Jordan's case. Magic had a triple-double and led his Lakers to a victory. And although Jordan did have a monstrous performance both as a scorer and as a passer, when the game was on the line, MJ came up short, as his potential game-tying jumper rattled in and out. Now the Lakers had stolen home court advantage from Chicago, and whether it was fair or not, It looked like the narratives might persist about these two superstars. To describe Game 2 as being crucial for the Bulls would be an understatement, as it would be devastating if they were to lose their first 2 games on their home floor. The game was competitive throughout the first half, while Jordan was looking to be more of a distributor. MJ barely looked to score in the first half, but in the second half, he became extremely aggressive, while maintaining a level of efficiency that was difficult to believe. Michael Jordan wasn't just hot in the third and fourth quarter, but he quite possibly put on the hottest scoring display in a single half of finals history. He was literally automatic. He was in the process of breaking the finals record for the most consecutive field goals made without a miss. Within this span, it went from a close and competitive contest to an absolute blowout. Jordan got up to 12 consecutive field goals made without a miss, and the crowd was going absolutely nuts. He was taking over on the game's ultimate stage, proving that he can win at the highest level while being a leading scorer. Then the highlight happened, when Jordan made the iconic hand switch layup, which was now his 13th straight shot without a miss. Even the typically stoic Phil Jackson had to shake his head in amazement, as Michael was quite literally playing perfect basketball over an extended period of time. When I watched this game for the first time as a kid, it almost seemed like Jordan was so hot that he faked the dunk and switched to his offhand, just to make the shot more difficult on himself. According to Michael, he did it because he thought Sam Perkins was going to jump and contest the shot on his right side, so he then switched to his left. Not only did the Bulls proceed to win this game, but they wouldn't lose another game in this final series, as they won their first of 6 championships. So yes, the shot itself was very impressive, but it's everything else around it that made it so special, so iconic, and so timeless, like the record-breaking streak and the destruction of a narrative that once hindered Jordan's legacy. Because of how the Bulls took the momentum with authority in Game 2, this image became a symbol of many things. In a way, it was the start of their dynasty. It was the moment where MJ ripped the torch out of Magic Johnson's hand and led the league his way moving forward. It became the symbolic image of Jordan reaching his prime and becoming not just the league's best player, but its new definition of a winner. Now, could another athlete today make this same shot with this same degree of difficulty? Absolutely. But come back to me when someone does this in the NBA Finals, while making 13 consecutive field goals, while asserting himself as the new face of the league, while defeating his greatest competitor. The truth is, this sequence was one of a kind, and we've never seen anything quite like it since, and we likely never will. How successful is Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen? How successful is Shaquille O'Neal without Kobe Bryant? Or how about Magic Johnson without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? No superstar players win multiple championships without any help, and especially without a co-star. Maybe the most slept-on co-star in NBA history is Joe Dumars of the Bad Boy Pistons. The Pistons of the late 80s and early 90s were one of the deepest and most talented teams of all time. They were led by their smiling assassin Isaiah Thomas, who famously took his team to 3 straight NBA Finals from 1988 to 1990, as they won back-to-back championships in 89 and 90. And who knows, if it wasn't for one of the most controversial foul calls in the 1988 NBA Finals, then they likely would have won 3 straight championships. Now, when it comes to this historic team that was a borderline dynasty, people think of Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer. Maybe even throw in Dennis Rodman and Rick Mahorn. I think most people would agree that those guys are the faces of the team. After all, Isaiah was the leader and the greatest player on that roster, while Laimbeer, Mahorn, and Rodman were the players who brought the attitude and swagger that made them the Bad Boy Pistons. With that being said, somehow, the second best player on the team has been largely forgotten and overlooked in basketball lore. Make no mistake, Joe Dumars was not just a role player, but he was very much a star who was talented enough to be the leader of his own team. Joe's talent and impact is overlooked for one major reason. He was the good boy on the bad boy Pistons. Whenever there was a fight or altercation, the one guy who usually wasn't involved was Joe Dumars. He wasn't a trash talker, and unlike Isaiah Thomas, his game wasn't incredibly flashy. Sure, it had some elements of excitement and dazzling ball handling, but relatively, he was seen as the more stoic one. He simply showed up and did his job, humbly, quietly, and effectively, which I think is why he is often forgotten. Because as great as he was, his personality and approach simply didn't match the identity of his team. That ultimately made them famous. Michael Jordan was the arch nemesis of the Pistons during that era, and he has publicly stated that he hates Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons, and that this hatred still burns to this very day. The thing is, as much as MJ hates this squad, the one player he has always spoken positively about is Joe Dumars. MJ is on record saying, "My toughest battles were with Joe Dumars. No one plays tougher than Joe. He thought well and he was very smart about his defense. I think he approaches the game as trying to dissect his opponents and try to find weaknesses and try to force them to do things they didn't feel comfortable doing. He introduced certain tricks to make me expand my talents as an offensive player, and that's why I consider him the best." So at this point, you might be asking yourself, who really was Joe Dumars? So you've heard me explain his approach, and you've heard Michael Jordan give his thoughts. But what was his game like? Well, Joe Dumars was a 6'3" shooting guard, who was taken by the Pistons in the 1985 NBA draft. And as he ascended to star status, the Pistons were becoming serious title contenders. And trust me, that correlation is no coincidence. He was a shifty guard with a fantastic handle and a killer crossover, but it was extremely tight and safe, as he was never the kind of guy to lead the team in turnovers. He had the speed to blow by his defender and finish at the rim, but he was also a deadly pull-up shooter, so if you played him too close, you were in danger of getting beat to the rim. But if they gave him too much space, then he would simply take advantage by burying perimeter shots. He didn't shoot a ton of three-point shots in his career, as he was very selective with his attempts. But when he did shoot them, he was one of the most efficient in the entire league, as he made 38% over the course of his career, which is solid by today's standards. But in the 1980s, it was especially lethal. Beyond that, he was a remarkable passer, who was always quick to find the open man and deliver the basketball with extreme precision. As Jordan talked about earlier, Dumars was an elite perimeter defender. Sure, the bad boy Pistons are famous for their quote Jordan rules, where they would use guys like Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn to physically punish Jordan whenever he got to the paint. But on the perimeter, it was Dumars who always defended him cleanly and effectively. Broadway Joe earned 5 All-Defense Team selections in his NBA career, with 4 of those being first team. During their first championship season in 1989, he averaged 17 points and 6 assists, while making 50% of his shots, 48% of his three-point shots, and 85% of his free throws, while simultaneously being viewed as the best defensive player at his position that season. He was even better in the playoffs, as he led his team in scoring in the first round against the Boston Celtics, and in the NBA Finals against the defending champion Lakers. In those finals, Los Angeles could do nothing to slow him down, as he dropped 33 points in a 3-point victory in Game 2, and then 31 points in a 4-point victory in Game 3. This Lakers team was undefeated throughout the Western Conference playoffs, with an 11-0 record, and the Pistons proceeded to sweep them on the game's biggest stage, with Joe Dumars leading the pack, as he averaged 27 points and 6 assists on 58% shooting over the course of the series. Naturally, he was awarded the Finals MVP for his tremendous play. During their second championship season, Dumars was again solid, including an impressive performance in the Eastern Conference Finals against Jordan and the Bulls. In that 7-game series, Dumars led the Pistons in scoring, while simultaneously defending the greatest player in the sport. People who watched this team win as it happened completely understand that Dumars wasn't just a part of their championship success, but he was as pivotal as it gets. What's interesting is that this wasn't even the prime of his career, as he was still only in his mid-20s. But the Pistons team would slowly decline over the next few seasons, as older veterans like Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer were reaching their twilight phase. So even though Dumars was reaching his prime, he didn't have the talent around him that he once did. For example, in the 92-93 season, Dumars averaged a career-high 23.5 points per game while securing an MVP vote. But it would only translate to a 40-42 record, as the Pistons were now one of the oldest teams in the entire league. He stuck around for a while and remained effective. He never left the Detroit Pistons, but he did end up retiring in 1999 at the age of 36. During his retirement ceremony, Ken Calvert, the longtime PA announcer of the Detroit Pistons, described Joe Dumars as the backbone of their championship teams. He said, whatever the team needed, whether it was a triple, a floater, or a post-up, or maybe checking Magic, or Michael, Joe did that. All in all, he was a 6-time All-Star, a 5-time All-Defender, a 2-time NBA champion, a Finals MVP, and a Sportsmanship Award winner in 1996. Say what you want about the Bad Boy Pistons, but you can't have an honest conversation about that championship squad without talking about the good boy, Joe Dumars. If you're a subscriber to this channel, then you know this channel is all about NBA history, as that is my passion and that is what I love to cover. So with that being said, I see it as my own personal responsibility to make sure you guys don't forget about certain players throughout NBA history. Or maybe you never knew about these players in the first place. So let me take you back in time, as we look at 4 players who were the real deal, but no one talks about anymore. First off, Michael Redd. This 6'6" shooting guard played the majority of his time with the Milwaukee Bucks, and he was a smooth lefty with a pristine handle and with a killer jump shot. What I remember about this guy is that he was an absolute sniper, and the very definition of a walking bucket. He was great for quite a while in the NBA, but he was really stellar in the 05-06 season, where he averaged 25 points per game, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists, while shooting 45% from the field, 40% from three-point range, and he was making 88% of his free throws. This guy had a remarkable aim, and if you were not careful defending him, he could put up a lot of points in a hurry. And the Utah Jazz learned that the hard way when he dropped 57 points on them in November of 2006.
Red, yes, and one with that kind of play. Michael Redd has 40. Going, don't let them get away. How about it? Quarter. Michael Redd has 51. The last Bucks player to score 50 or more in a game, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Aaron Williams tied up Redd on the breakout. Michael catches, shoots, 3. Yes! Michael Redd, 57 points, a Bucks record.
Another player who was deadly around that same time frame was Danny Granger. This guy was a 6'9" small forward, and he had all the skills. He had a slow start to his NBA career, but when his ascension began, it happened fast. He became the first player in NBA history to lift his scoring by at least 5 points per game in 3 consecutive seasons. He was incredibly gifted as a shooter and as a slasher. With his skills, with his frame, and with his ability to be a 3-dimensional scorer, he really reminded me of a prime Tracy McGrady. His only All-Star season was in 2009, and he was an absolute beast that year, as he averaged 26 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists, while hitting 45% of his shots, 40% of his threes, and 88% of his free throws. During one stretch specifically that season, he had 3 consecutive games with at least 35 points. So there was no doubt that he was becoming a premier scorer in this league.
Going up on 3 minutes to play. His second 3 ball.
Granger gets 3 right back.
Unbelievable. And Granger has it. Catch, shoot. Count it. And a foul. Jazz have come up empty on 8 straight possessions. Granger. Oh! Baby, McRoberts is going to bring the house down with that big hammer. Granger, 3, got it. He's flirting with 40. He's got 38 on the night on the dribble against CJ. Contact, put it up and in. There's 40. 40.9 for Granger.
Now understand, this all happened at the young age of 25, so it seemed like his best days were still ahead of him, and the sky was the limit. Unfortunately, he did end up becoming a bit of a what if, since a torn ligament in his foot and several knee issues hindered his ability to reach his full potential. Another player who was absolutely lethal during his playing days was the 6'5" small forward Adrian Dantley. To put it simply, this Hall of Famer is easily one of the most underrated scorers in the history of the game, as he won 2 scoring titles and made 6 All-Star teams. For his career, he averaged 24 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists, while hitting a ridiculous 54% of his shots. That's right, a 6'5" small forward averaged 24 points for a career while hitting 54%, which is a rate of efficiency that even great centers can only dream of. But it was his peak with the Utah Jazz that was especially insane, as he averaged at least 30 points per game in 4 consecutive seasons. And over that time, he was making a ridiculous 56.4% of his shots. Now let me make this clear. Although this guy was an incredible scorer, I wouldn't describe his game as flashy. He was just crafty, methodical, and intelligent. He was almost exclusively a mid-range scorer, but with his stellar footwork and with his incredibly high release point on his jump shot, he could basically get a good look at will. And it's why he ended up becoming one of the greatest and most efficient scorers the game has ever seen. And the last guy to talk about on this short list is the 6'6" shooting guard Brandon Roy. This guy is a major what if, as he was barely reaching his mid-20s by the time he started having significant injuries. But at one point, Kobe Bryant himself said that Brandon Roy was the most difficult player to guard in the Western Conference. He was the Rookie of the Year in 2007. But by 2009, he was an MVP candidate, averaging 23 points, 5 assists, and 5 rebounds, while hitting 48% of his shots, 38% of his threes, and 82% of his free throws. But one thing that people often don't remember about this guy is not only did he have a great handle, and not only was he a great pull-up shooter, but his ability to create his own shot and knock down clutch buckets at will was absolutely incredible to say the least. Without question, he was one of the most clutch players in the game, as he was constantly making big shots in fourth quarters and in overtimes. Unfortunately, most of you guys probably know this story, as his knees absolutely betrayed him and destroyed any hopes he had of longevity. Well before he even reached his 30th birthday, he had played his final game in the NBA. So it may have been brief, and it may have only been just a moment in time, but for at least a little bit, these guys were box office, and unfortunately, they're rarely talked about in basketball discussions nowadays. So recently, I've been getting back into Major League Baseball, and it's got me thinking about a comparison that's pretty interesting. In the NBA, the league only honors one player a year with a regular season MVP award, but that isn't how it works in Major League Baseball. And this league, they have basically always awarded 2 per season, one American League MVP and one National League MVP. The American League and the National League is basically the MLB's equivalent to the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference in the NBA, which is where the thought comes in. What if the NBA gave out 2 MVP awards each season, the same way that the MLB does? If this was the case, it would definitely change things dramatically in the NBA. And maybe it would even alter the way we look at certain players' legacies, and how we rank them among the all-time greats. In baseball, a player like Barry Bonds was able to win 7 MVP awards thanks to the fact that he was only competing with guys who were within his own league/conference. An active player like Shohei Ohtani is barely into his 30s, yet he already has 3 MVP awards. So how do NBA players stack up if there was an award handed out to a player from each conference? Well, before I really get into it, let me first explain how this works. Unlike my series where I explained who would win the MVP if they simply gave it to the best player each season, this one is not based on my opinion, but actual facts. You see, every NBA MVP in history was determined by a group of voters, and we have the data not only on who won the award, but also in terms of who was on the list. All I'm doing in this video is telling you who led the MVP voting each season from the other conference that didn't have the actual MVP winner. For example, SGA just won the 2025 MVP award, but in this scenario, he just would have been the Western Conference MVP, and based on the voting, Giannis would have been the Eastern Conference MVP. So in reality, any one of you guys could do this research yourself and figure out the answers, but I did all of this so you don't have to. The complete list of the new MVP winners is in the video's description if you want to check it out. But beyond that, I want to tell you the things that stood out to me, and give you a final tally when it's all said and done. So first off, the logo, Jerry West, goes from a player who has no MVP awards to a 3-time winner, which I gotta think would greatly improve his legacy and the way he's perceived nowadays. Believe it or not, Michael Jordan's co-star, Scottie Pippen, now has an MVP award, thanks to his performance in the 1994 season, the year Jordan was retired playing baseball. A guy who is typically seen as a great what-if, Tracy McGrady, now has an MVP award, thanks to his incredible play in the 2003 season. Now I gotta say, what was probably my most surprising realization is the fact that Jermaine O'Neal would now be an MVP winner, based on his season in 2004. Now don't get me wrong, I watched this guy play and he was solid, but even back when I was watching him play during his prime, I didn't necessarily consider him as a potential MVP winner, but in this format, he is in fact a winner. Now Magic Johnson gets an insane boost from this format, and it comes as no surprise as Magic and the Showtime Lakers dominated the Western Conference throughout the 1980s. In our reality, Magic has 3 MVP awards, but in this format, he gets 6 more, taking his total to 9. All 9 of those MVP awards are consecutive, as he's winning from 1983 to 1991. His 9 straight MVPs would be the greatest streak of any player in NBA history. And honestly, he would probably have an even longer streak if he didn't retire due to HIV in 1991. Under this format, LeBron James gains a total of 8 MVPs. In this scenario, LeBron would have won 9 MVPs in a 10-year stretch, including 7 straight from 2012 to 2018. Now Michael Jordan also gets a major boost as he now adds 4 MVPs to his total. Now some other noteworthy players who would get a huge boost would be Bob Pettit, who goes from 2 MVPs to 5. Kevin Durant goes from 1 MVP to a total of 4. Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal each go from 1 MVP to 3. Giannis goes from 2 MVPs to 4. And Joel Embiid and Bob McAdoo each go from 1 MVP to a total of 3. Also, there's a lot of guys who now win their first and only MVP award, like Paul Arizin, George Yardley, Nate Thurmond, Lenny Wilkins, John Havlicek, Rick Barry, Pistol Pete Maravich, George the Iceman Gervin, Elvin Hayes, Clyde Drexler, Scottie Pippen, Jason Kidd, Tracy McGrady, and of course, Jermaine O'Neal. So now, under this new format, we're looking at the top spots for the most MVP awards in NBA history. And leading the pack is none other than LeBron James, who has a jaw-dropping total of 12. And honestly, I think this detail is rather interesting and also kind of comical, because I can already see the argument from both sides. On one hand, LeBron fans will try to use this data to further their case for LeBron being the greatest player of all time. But on the other hand, I can see LeBron's critics using this as information that LeBron in fact played in a weaker Eastern Conference throughout the majority of his career. Honestly, I'll let you guys duke it out, but no matter which angle you take, you've got to be impressed with this total. Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan are now tied at 9, followed closely by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with 8. So now I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you like the MLB's model where they give out 2 MVP awards? Or do you think it's ideal the way the NBA already does it, with only 1 league MVP regardless of the 2 conferences? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below.
Love Shaq, but I'm disappointed in his career because I think he left a lot out. He didn't take it serious enough. He didn't get himself in the best physical condition that he needed to be in and year out. He was a 52% free throw shooter.
Mm-hmm.
He missed probably 100 games due to various injuries.
He did.
A lot because of his weight.
You're correct.
I believe he should have had at least 2 MVPs. I believe he should have had another 1 or 2 NBA finals. And when he retired, he should have been the 3rd all-time leading scorer in history, behind Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Karl Malone. But he underachieved.
Who would Shaq be if he had your work ethic?
He'd be the greatest of all time. Yeah, I wish he was in the gym. I would have had 12 rings.
So you hear it over and over again, even from people who really know their stuff. The narrative that Shaquille O'Neal didn't live up to his potential. He didn't work as hard as he could have, that he left a lot on the table, and that his longevity doesn't stack up to many of the greatest players of all time. But is this actually the case? I mean, sure, of course there's some truth to a certain extent. Even Shaq admitted in his conversation with Kobe Bryant that he didn't always treat his fitness as a priority. And then, when it came to his free throws, Shaq did refuse to try Rick Barry's free throw form, simply because he was a prideful guy who thought it looked stupid. But with that being said, was his conditioning and longevity really as bad as people make it seem? Honestly, I'm not so sure. And today, I'm pushing back a bit on this widespread narrative about Shaq. Now first off, you guys know I love Kobe, and he's my favorite player ever, and I treat most of his comments as if they came from a wise sage of basketball wisdom. But not everything the guy said was complete gospel. For example, he said in this interview that he would have won 12 rings if Shaq had his work ethic. And what's funny is that no one ever mentions that Kobe and Shaq only played 8 seasons together. So unless Kobe's work ethic was so good that he could somehow win 2 championships in only 1 season, this comment is basically total cap from Kobe. Now Shaq entered the NBA at the age of 20, and he was immediately a force, as he won the Rookie of the Year award in his debut season. Then, in only a sophomore season as a 21-year-old, he was averaging 29 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 blocks on 60% shooting. In only his second year, he was already 2nd in scoring, 2nd in rebounding, and 1st in field goal percentage. Shaq was an MVP finalist in his first couple of seasons, and then in his 13th season in the NBA as a member of the Miami Heat, he was 2nd in MVP voting, behind only Steve Nash. For some perspective, in Michael Jordan's 13th season, he was retiring from the Chicago Bulls and was about to become a Washington Wizard. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were retired before they even reached their 14th season, and once Tim Duncan reached his 13th season in the NBA, he would never again be a top 5 finalist in the MVP voting. Shaq was arguably the best center in the NBA for nearly a decade and a half. Yet by the way people talk about him, you get the impression that he only dominated the league for 5 seasons. Sure, he could have lasted longer and achieved more if he had Kobe's work ethic. Of course. But isn't that true of all of us? Who would you be if you had Kobe's work ethic? Who would I be? Who would Hakeem Olajuwon be? Who would Giannis be? Who would Luka be? Basically, no other player in NBA history has ever had quite the insane and maniacal work ethic that Kobe had. So naturally, this what if could apply to just about anyone. But for some reason, we only hold Shaq to this monumental standard, even though he was dominant for nearly a decade and a half straight. Now some of you might say, we're not just talking about Shaq being great, we're talking about his peak. Alright, if that's the case, let's look at it from that perspective. Shaq's absolute peak as a basketball player was the 1999 to 2000 season, where he averaged roughly 30 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks, on his way to his near-unanimous MVP season. This was after Shaq had put on a significant amount of weight and muscle. So sure, he was a physical specimen, but compared to his thinner and quicker sophomore season in Orlando, it's not like the production was all that different. But for the sake of the argument, even if Shaq's greatest individual season was so far ahead of any other seasons he's ever had, is it really fair to hold him to that standard when we often don't hold other all-time greats to that same standard? For example, Steph Curry's unanimous MVP season in 2016 is so far above and beyond any other season he's ever produced. And yet, we don't punish him for failing to maintain that same level of dominance year in and year out. Wilt Chamberlain is famous for averaging over 50 points in a single season, but he only averaged over 40 points in 2 seasons of his career. So why don't we punish him in the same way that we do for Shaq, for failing to maintain his peak? Now I get it. Some of this bad PR Shaq brought upon himself, by coming into training camp fat on multiple occasions, and by admitting that he often relied on Kobe to carry the team in the earlier parts of the season. But again, we're talking about a man who finished as the 9th highest scorer in NBA history, who led his team to the NBA Finals 13 seasons apart, who was a 15-time All-Star, a 14-time All-NBA player, and a guy who was a legitimate MVP candidate for 13 straight seasons. They say with great power comes great responsibility, and we all know that Shaq had plenty of power. And yes, when he was on the court during his prime, he was in fact Superman. But is it possible that we're holding him to a standard that was even too high for Superman to reach? For goodness sake, every time I hear someone take a dump on his longevity, even though he was an NBA candidate for nearly a decade and a half straight, I want to ask them what they wanted from him instead. Was he supposed to be an MVP caliber player for 17 or 18 seasons straight? How many players have actually done that? Spoiler alert, you can count them on one hand. At the end of the day, Shaq could have got more out of his career if he had an obsessive work ethic. But at the same time, there's no question in my mind that this narrative has become vastly overblown, to the point that the criticism has become silly and unreasonable, especially when people dare to call him a disappointment. There's a lot of things that Shaq's NBA career was, and disappointing is definitely not one of them. Alright, so today we're doing something a little bit different, because I don't know what's in the water amongst the NBA media and amongst former NBA players, but it feels like everybody is making super wild comments lately. It's been really hilarious to see my fellow old head basketball channels freaking out covering all of this. And honestly, I've been meaning to too. Tracy McGrady's been making crazy comments, Gilbert Arenas said some crazy stuff, LeBron said some stuff, Dwayne Wade said some stuff, and so on. The thing is, I typically make scripted, edited videos that take a lot of time, so it's just really happening too fast to cover each and every one in a video. So instead, I've decided to do something different today. And basically, we're gonna watch all of these comments together, and then I'm gonna react to it after I listen to it. That way you'll get my most genuine and raw reaction, but that also means we can cover a lot in a short amount of time. This video is probably going to get copyrighted, but every once in a while that's alright. At least I'll be able to give you guys my thoughts on all of these matters.
A ring is a team accomplishment. Right. I don't know where it started, it's just it's a long conversation, especially when it comes to me individually. I don't know why it's discussed so much in our sport. You tell me, Allen Iverson and Charles Barkley and Steve Nash. our wasn't unbelievable. Like, oh, they can't be talked about or discussed with these guys just because this guy won 1 ring or won 2 rings or won, like, it's just weird to me. It's like saying Peyton Manning can't be in the same room with Brady or Mahomes because he only has 1 ring. Barry Bonds never won a World Series. So. You can't sit here and tell me that he's not the greatest baseball player to ever touch a bat.
Alright, so we just listened to LeBron's thoughts, and let me start this off by saying that I don't completely disagree with him, but I also don't completely agree with him. Yes, rings are not the be-all, end-all, because at the end of the day, like he said, it is a team accomplishment, and how each individual player performs really matters. For example, Jerry West was 1-8 in the NBA Finals, but he was called Mr. Clutch for a reason, and the reason is because when the playoffs came around, he individually did his job. He was almost always performing his best when it mattered the most. The problem is that the Celtics were just so stacked overall that he could average 37 points over the course of a finals series and be named the finals MVP while losing that series, just because championships are not a one-man job. So I get it, there's nuance to this. But I don't get the vibe that that's what LeBron is saying. He makes it sound like rings shouldn't be a part of the equation at all. And that to me is wild and flat out ridiculous. First off, it's also a contradiction to what LeBron has said in the past. Because remember, he called himself the GOAT specifically because he won the championship in 2016 over the Golden State Warriors. So unless he's changed his mind since then, he's contradicting his own stance in this instance. Listen, at the beginning of the year, before the opening tip has even happened, everybody is focused on winning an NBA championship. The players, the coaches, the executives, the fans. That's what everyone wants. That's the goal that everyone is pushing for. So to act like this should have no value in how we grade players is flat out ridiculous. Because yes, it is a team accomplishment. But since we're looking at LeBron, let's use LeBron as an example. In the 2011 NBA Finals, LeBron would have won the championship over the Dallas Mavericks if he didn't average 17 points per game over that series. This is the biggest reason why I personally see Michael Jordan as the greatest player of all time. It's not just because he was 6-0 in the NBA Finals, it was because of how he performed in those 6 finals appearances. He was almost breaking records every single time he made it to the finals. Yes, it is a team accomplishment, but how you, as the leader, as the superstar, perform when it matters the most can determine whether or not your team wins a championship. So to act like that shouldn't be a part of the equation is just asinine. It's not the end-all be-all. It's not the only thing we look at. Because again, if you look at some of my all-time rankings, I do have certain players who have less rings over players who have more rings. Because again, it's about that nuance. But let's not try to deem it worthless in this conversation.
Get him, Gil.
You're free. I'm here.
What he's saying is actually correct. Like, when did ring culture become a thing, right? When you talk about a team award, something that a structure needs to win, does not boost you in front of individual accomplishments. And when you used Kobe, would frowned upon what LeBron said, okay. I would disagree with that.
Got you.
I would disagree with that because
I remember what I said there.
In real time, Kobe had 3 rings. Y'all wasn't treating him like a 3-ring player. You was treating him like a sidekick. He was considered a sidekick. He was considered a Robin. He was considered the next Pippen. In 2002, with 3 rings, we were still comparing T-Mac. Who was better in the league? You couldn't convince the NBA down the middle who was better. So
between
T-Mac and Cole.
Totally true.
Right? So if you're sitting there with 3 rings and you're still being compared to someone who doesn't have rings, what do you think happened? I need individual accomplishments. Can you please get rid of Shaq? Right? Because if it was about rings, there was no reason for the fallout with him and Shaq. The fallout was about you only respect the driver of the car. No one respects the passenger of rings. Right? There's no one says it, but the one who's leading the one who's leading the team, that's the gold member right there. That ring counts. The second option ring, that's silver when no one respects it.
Okay, all right. I gotta stop Gilbert Arenas because these are just some horrible takes. First of all, we gotta reject his stupid premise. Saying nobody respects or appreciates the second guy in command is just ridiculous. So was the leader of the team literally the only guy who receives any credit for winning championships? Absolutely not. The second best guy up gets a ton of credit for what he did winning a championship. Who was number one for the Showtime Lakers? Probably Magic the majority of the time. Do we not give credit to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for all the championships he won with Magic? Of course we do. Do we not give credit to Scottie Pippen for his 6 championships? Of course we do. We always mention Scottie among the greatest players in NBA history. But if he didn't have Michael Jordan, he doesn't have 6 championships, and he's not in that conversation. But because Scottie was a big help in winning those rings, he's still in that conversation. We give him his respect. There's also some egregious revisionist history going on here. Nobody was ever calling Kobe Bryant the next Scottie Pippen. That just didn't happen. I've been seeing tons of channels putting in clips over and over again from 2000 to 2003 where people were constantly calling Kobe the next Michael Jordan. And this is just dishonest. This is the biggest reason why I don't like Gilbert Arenas as an analyst, because he's just extremely dishonest. This is revisionist history. The only reason he was considered a sidekick at times was because Shaq was so damn incredible. But that didn't make Kobe less. It was a Batman and Nightwing situation. He was not a Scottie Pippen Robin. Scottie Pippen was never the 30 points per game scorer that Kobe Bryant was when he was with Shaq. Scottie Pippen was never the closer for the Chicago Bulls like Kobe was. Year in and year out, Kobe Bryant was right there in first or second place for the league leaders in fourth quarter points per game. That is something that Scottie could only dream of, as Michael was the guy who was always taking over late in games. This is just complete and utter nonsense from Arenas, and it's easy to disprove.
Got it.
What happens is when we diminish the likes of the other players, I'll tell you where it really affects people like athletes, because then everybody out there starts easily diminishing the talented players.
Right.
So you got people out there who are fans. When we love fans, we got respect for it.
Got it.
Discounting the greatness of the individual talent, calling people bums because they didn't live up to the narrative that the media has set on what defines greatness as greatness.
No disagreement there.
Alright, I gotta stop Jason Williams here real quick. The only people who call guys bums because they don't have championship rings are 8-year-olds on Twitter. That is ridiculous. Let's not give that any weight. We are able to recognize that guys were great or guys were talented even if they didn't have a championship ring. For goodness sake, how often do we give our flowers to Allen Iverson? How often do people say that he's one of the top 5 most influential players in NBA history, regardless of the fact that he didn't win a championship ring? He only got 1 win in the NBA Finals, but it was so amazing and it was so iconic that we were willing to immortalize him for it. This narrative and this idea that we only give love and respect to guys who have championships is total BS. Yes, guys with rings are celebrated more, as they should be, but it doesn't mean that all the other guys are treated as bums and never given their respect.
What defines greatness? Is it the championship?
That's one of the elements.
I mean,
in some cases, yeah.
I don't see anything he said wrong. I didn't see your response, but for me, we have too many talented players that come through this league that are championship worthy. What I mean by that, if you take them off a team that is a championship quality team, replace me with Kobe with Shaq. I don't win a championship. You don't think I could carry the Lakers to a championship? Like, I've never had the opportunity.
Correct.
I felt like if I was put in that position to win a championship, I damn sure would show up and do what I do in the playoffs to elevate my team to that level. I just never had the chance. So do I get diminished because I never won a championship?
Right.
Alright, so I gotta admit, I actually don't hate what Tracy McGrady said as much as a lot of people do. But there is some parts that are a little bit ridiculous and we'll get into that. But first let's start off what I don't hate. I really don't mind the fact that he said, I'm not gonna win a championship. He didn't say he would be equally successful to Kobe Bryant, which is what everybody is acting like he said. He said, I'm not gonna win a championship. If Kobe got 3 with Shaq, then yeah, I think that Tracy McGrady would get at least 1. Specifically, in the 2000 to 2001 season, where the Lakers went 15-1 in the NBA playoffs. And I get it, Kobe Bryant was incredible throughout those playoffs. The point I'm making is that Shaq was so dominant, there was an array of incredible shooters on that supporting cast, that I do think the combination of Tracy and Shaq in 2001 would have won one championship. And to then get on Tracy and ridicule him and say that he wouldn't have won 3, to me seems silly because that's not what he said. So why should I make an argument against it? The only thing I had a problem with is that Tracy said he never had an opportunity. And I do recognize that overall, Kobe Bryant had a better supporting cast than Tracy McGrady did throughout his career. But there's reasons that McGrady didn't have many opportunities. For example, you had Vince Carter in his prime.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. You just had to be the man.
You had to go to Orlando. You had to make more money. You had the setup to be a year in and year out contender in the Eastern Conference, the weaker conference at the time. You could have been going to the finals year after year, as Vinsanity and T-Mac would have been one of the greatest duos we've ever seen. But you left that because you had to be the man. He didn't have a tremendous amount of support in Orlando, but again, he chose to sign there. And him speaking so confidently about winning a championship is pretty rich coming from a player who couldn't make it out of the first round for like 7 straight seasons. I get you don't have the most talented supporting cast, but you can't make it out of the first round one time? I still remember that interview with Stephen A. Smith way long ago, when he was on the verge of yet another Game 7.
You don't consider yourself an underdog this year, do you?
I don't consider myself an underdog, not at all.
So if you don't
if I don't make it out of the first round this year, it'll be a disappointment on my part.
When you say on your part, what do you mean by that?
Meaning, I feel that this is my team. How far we go is riding on my shoulders. It's on me. If we don't get out of the first round, it's on me.
Wait a minute.
If we don't get out of the first round this year, it's on me.
Now, he's making it seem like it's on everybody but him. And then, when you were on the Houston Rockets, and you were playing alongside of Ron Artest and Yao Ming and Shane Battier and a whole bunch of guys that were capable of winning, you were getting injured year in and year out. And that's unfortunate, and that sucks. But being healthy when it all matters is part of winning a championship. Nobody else should be taking the blame for that. So I love T-Mac, and I do wish he would have had more talent around him throughout the vast majority of his career. But some of these comments are just flat out wild and are completely neglecting his own responsibilities. The last thing I want to say about this panel is that it's really hilarious that they're having a conversation about ring culture with 3 guys who never won a championship ring. What the hell do you think they're gonna say? Of course they're justifying not having a ring and saying that they should still be in that conversation because they're coping. That's what happens when you're a guy who wanted to win but couldn't win. That's how it works. It's like asking a bunch of high school dropouts about the value of having a college education. What do you think they're gonna say? So honestly, I would have appreciated it if ESPN and all of their wisdom would have just got one guy on this panel who did in fact win some championship rings, just to add a little bit of perspective. Alright, so now I'm towards the end of the video and I'm seeing that this reaction and all my thoughts is getting quite long. I wanted to react to what Dwayne Wade said, but I think I'll just do that in a part 2. So guys, I had a lot of thoughts. Clearly I got worked up about this. But I really just hate the fact that there's an attack on winning. Winning has always been the most important thing on how we view the greats, because it's the most valuable thing in the entire sport. And for someone like LeBron James to say, I don't know what started all this, dude, it's been this way forever. Why do you think Bill Russell was the guy winning MVP year in and year out, even though Wilt Chamberlain was averaging 40 to 50 points per game? Because the guys they were competing against in the league at that time, who were the voters, knew what style and what focus was leading to winning basketball. They knew which player was winning championships. That's what mattered even in the 1960s. And up until this point, that has always been the most valuable thing. But now, all of a sudden, a bunch of guys want to shake up the conventional way of thinking, and honestly, I think it's because it benefits them. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, because this is a really loaded topic. Have you ever been competing in something and said to yourself, if that guy who's up against me wasn't a part of this, then I'd be dominating this competition? Yeah, that happens in the NBA as well. Today, we're taking a look at an interesting concept. Who are the players who would get the greatest boost to their legacy if you were to erase one other player from existence? It's not just about how good you are, but it also matters who you're up against. And the reality is, some NBA legends have faced greater competition than others. Now, by no means do I think this is a complete list of the greatest examples, but it's simply the biggest examples that come to mind for me personally. So please, let me know in the comment section below what are some other examples that come to mind. So without further ado, let's get into it. One of the players who get the greatest boost if you eliminate someone else is Larry Bird without Magic Johnson. Obviously, we all know Larry Bird is one of the top 10 greatest players of all time, and some even think he's as high as top 5, as he won 3 NBA championships, 2 finals MVPs, and 3 MVPs during his time in the NBA. But as we all know, his greatest competition throughout the 1980s was his rival, Magic Johnson. If Magic Johnson wasn't a part of the equation, then it's pretty safe to assume that the Celtics would have won the championship in 1985 and in 1987, since the Lakers are no longer a part of that matchup. Obviously, someone else would be representing the West in the Lakers' place, but beating the Celtics in that era was no easy task. So in all likelihood, Larry Legend is going from 3 championships to 5. And probably going from just 2 finals MVPs to a total of 4. The one area where he's not actually gaining is in the regular season MVP award, as he would still have a total of 3, seeing how he was actually never the runner-up to Magic Johnson. Now the next player who would get a significant boost to his legacy would be Wilt Chamberlain if there wasn't a Bill Russell. Now from a statistical standpoint, you could certainly make the argument that Wilt Chamberlain is the greatest player of all time. For goodness sake, he averaged over 50 points and over 25 rebounds in a single season. And in that same season, he had 4 straight games where he scored at least 60 points, and the 4th game was 100. This guy's name is the record book, and for good reason, as he holds more NBA records than any other player in NBA history, and frankly, it isn't even close. The only reason why Wilt isn't unanimously seen as the greatest player of all time is because he didn't have that same level of success in the postseason, as he only won 2 NBA championships over the course of his career, compared to his rival Bill Russell, who ended his career with a total of 11. But if you take Bill Russell out of the equation, now we're looking at least 4 NBA championships for Wilt Chamberlain, seeing that he did lose in the NBA Finals to Bill Russell twice. But overall, he was eliminated in the playoffs 7 times by Bill Russell, meaning that theoretically, he could have had as many as 9 championship rings. He's also increasing his league MVP total from 4 to 5. Imagine the perception of Wilt Chamberlain if he had 9 championship rings, more NBA records than any other player in NBA history, and a total of 5 MVP awards. If this was the case, then I think that most people would consider him as the greatest of all time rather than Michael Jordan. Speaking of Michael Jordan, one of the players who gets the biggest boost to their legacy is Karl Malone without MJ. Now, Karl Malone was a strong 6'9" power forward who was among the leaders on the NBA's all-time scoring list. With Michael Jordan in existence, he still was a very accomplished Hall of Famer who had 2 league MVP awards. But he also has 0 championship rings and 0 scoring titles. Now, Karl Malone without Michael Jordan theoretically would have 2 championship rings, thanks to his finals appearances in 1997 and in 1998. He's also now gaining the 1998 League MVP award, taking him up to a total of 3. And get this, he's going from 0 scoring titles to a total of 5, as he was the runner-up to Michael Jordan 5 separate times. If MJ didn't exist, then this would mean that Karl Malone would be second all-time, only behind Wilt Chamberlain for the most scoring titles in NBA history. With this resume, he would definitely be challenging Tim Duncan for the title of the greatest power forward in NBA history. The last one on my list is LeBron James without Steph Curry. Obviously, LeBron already has a stacked resume, as he's now the NBA's all-time leading scorer both in the regular season and in the playoffs. And he also has the most All-NBA selections to go along with his 4 championship rings and 4 finals MVPs. But remember, LeBron James and Steph Curry met up in the NBA Finals for 4 straight years, and LeBron only won one of those matchups in 2016. If Steph Curry never existed, then LeBron's taking his total of 4 championship rings to potentially as many as 7. And based on the rosters he had at that time, I think it's pretty safe to assume that he's increasing his finals MVPs to 7 as well, which would then be the most of all time. Now surprisingly, LeBron was never the runner-up to Steph Curry in the MVP race. But with that being said, that wouldn't be necessary to significantly boost his legacy with all these added rings.
That's not the end-all be-all. I always love a big 2. I don't really love a big 3. People talk big 3, but the big 3 thing has never really worked. And you say, well, what happened in Miami? That wasn't really a big 3. There was 3 guys that went in the lottery, and they did really well individually on their team. So they put up big numbers and had big accomplishments. But when you think about it, Bosh was the ultimate professional. He took a back seat, and he played a role in which, because he had such a high IQ and he was such a professional as an individual, his approach to everything is what made that work.
So as you can see, Clutch Sports is back at it again, as Rich Paul, the founder of the company and the lifelong friend of LeBron James, gave his thoughts on the Big 3 Miami Heat, claiming that they were never in fact a Big 3, but were instead just a Big 2. In this particular video, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I do not agree with Paul's statement, and frankly, I'm annoyed that he even suggested it. In order for an honest person to agree with his statement, they would have to be either one of 2 things. They would either be extremely young, so that they were not familiar with the Big 3 Heat during that era, or they would have to be a very casual basketball fan. I don't want to overstate or understate Bosh's talent and value when he was acquired by the Miami Heat. He was one of the best players in the league, but I certainly wouldn't say that he was top 5. This is actually how I would rank the top 20 players at the end of the 2009 to 2010 NBA season, and let me know in the comments section below how you would change up this order. So for me, Bosh was a borderline top 10 player. He was coming off a season in Toronto where they were 40 and 42, although the second best player on the team was Andrea Bargnani. So it's not like Bosh was necessarily swimming in supporting talent on the Raptors. That season, Bosh averaged 24 points, 10.8 rebounds, and 2.4 assists, while hitting 51.8% of his shots. He was 9th in the league in scoring, 6th in rebounding, 4th in player efficiency rating, and finished 12th in the MVP race, despite the fact that his team had a losing record. Now, contrary to popular belief, Bosh wasn't just a decent player who was putting up empty numbers on a bad team, but he was genuinely one of the most skilled big men in the entire league. His face-up game was dominant, as he was a quick 6'11" center/power forward. His jump shot was incredibly smooth and accurate as far as 20 feet out, and if you bit on his pump fake, he would punish you with his quick first step, as he blew by the defender and finished strong at the rim. One of his very specific areas of impact was as a low post scorer. In the 2009 to 2010 season, right before he joined the Miami Heat, he was literally the most efficient post scorer in the entire league, as he was hitting a tremendous 52.6% of his shots when posting up. This aspect is worth remembering, that Bosh was a traditional big man who was fundamentally sound and preferred to do much of his damage in the low post. So when Bosh officially joined the Miami Heat, he was only 26 years old, and it was the day before we knew where LeBron was heading in free agency. For that single day, many of us believed that the tandem of Wade and Bosh was enough to make Miami a legitimate title contender, and even Dwayne Wade talked about his excitement to play with Bosh.
But this opportunity that me and Chris have to, to team up and play together, Just an unbelievable opportunity for me to be able to play with someone of his caliber. I got an opportunity to play with Shaq, and that was just, phenomenal. And I get to play with, Chris, right when he hit his prime. Right now I'm one of the luckiest mans, in the NBA and in the world.
Did you notice how Wade said that Bosh was in his prime? The revisionist history that you typically hear from biased guys like Rich Paul is that Bosh wasn't the same player in Miami. He was an athlete on the decline. Now don't get me wrong, his numbers did drop off from Toronto to Miami, but this was not because his game declined, but this was simply because of the fact that Bosh was no longer the number one option, and instead was relegated to a third option behind LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. This reduced role was something that Bosh fully expected and accepted upon joining the Miami Heat. In his very first press conference after joining Miami, he talked about his reduced role and how he was willing to sacrifice for the team.
Everything is all about basketball. It's all about winning. I mean, if it was about the money and if it was about numbers, we'd all go back to our respective teams. It wasn't really about that. I mean, when you get wins, all the individual accolades come. I averaged my career best last year and nothing happened. So me personally, I can take it. I just think about it sometimes. I mean, just playing with these guys, yeah, sure, the numbers are going to go down, but like you say, the wins are going to go up and all that other stuff, it just falls into place.
You see, this was a mature athlete who understand that playing as a team within a system can sometimes negatively impact your individual numbers, but Bosh willingly accepted that in order to win. It was an unselfish and commendable move from an ideal teammate. But now, years later, disingenuous people want to act like those numbers dropped simply because he wasn't that great of a player. He apparently isn't even worth including in a big three. As I mentioned earlier, Bosh ideally plays the game of basketball as a traditional post-up big man. But with LeBron James on his team, Bosh had to adapt and become more of an off-ball perimeter threat. Now, instead of waiting for the rock in the post, Bosh would often be in the corner waiting for an opportunity as a spot-up jump shooter. This is why his three-point attempts started steadily increasing after joining Miami, because he had to adjust his game in order to help his team win. And sure, this all resulted in his numbers dropping as he went from a 24-11 guy in Toronto to a 19-8 guy in Miami. But even with that being the case, his numbers were still relatively impressive, especially for that era. Let me ask you, how impactful was Pau Gasol to the Lakers championship in 2009? He was Kobe's second best player, and he had numbers incredibly similar to Chris Bosh. How about Kevin Garnett for the Boston Celtics in 2008? He also had numbers incredibly similar to Bosh upon joining Miami. And yet, Pau Gasol and Kevin Garnett are celebrated as the second best players of their championship teams, while Bosh has to hear that he's not even a part of the quote Big Two, because he was willing to sacrifice some of his production. Historically, whenever a Big Three assembles, it is completely normal for at least one of those guys to see his numbers plummet, as he becomes the third scoring option. It happened to Wilt Chamberlain when he joined Jerry West and Elgin Baylor in 1968. It happened to Ray Allen when he joined Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett in 2007. And it happened to Kevin Love when he joined LeBron James and Kyrie Irving in 2014. The commonality between all of those third options is that they were all able to win their first championship because they were willing to make the sacrifices. So yes, it was a big three, and Chris Bosh deserves more respect. Upon uniting, they didn't celebrate in a concert-like atmosphere simply because LeBron joined Dwayne Wade and a role player, but rather it was because they were legitimately three superstars, who each earned an all-star selection in all 4 years of them being teammates. Each star player played a monumental role in their team's success, as they won 2 championships in the span of 4 seasons. So what do you guys think? Does Chris Bosh deserve more credit? Or does Rich Paul actually have a point? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. I've talked about this multiple times on the channel before, but what I think is the most annoying thing about modern basketball discourse is how people talk about the supporting casts of their favorite player. Nowadays, people are so tribalistic and so fanatical about their favorite player that it doesn't just stop at bragging about their favorite player, but they feel like they also have to degrade their favorite player's supporting cast in order to make their guy stand out to an even greater extent. Jordan fans do it, Kobe fans do it, and LeBron fans do it as well. Without question, one of the biggest victims of this, and possibly the biggest victim of them all, is the former NBA All-Star Kevin Love. Nowadays, if you suggest that the 2014 to 2015 Cleveland Cavaliers were an NBA super team, you'll quickly be ridiculed by a plethora of LeBron fans. But let me tell you, back then, I was there. And when Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, and Kevin Love all ended up on the same team, that felt like it was an emergence of yet another LeBron-led super team. In hindsight, people are acting like Kevin Love was simply a role player and wasn't a legitimate star at the time he joined LeBron. And sure, I'm not going to deny the fact that he wasn't as good in Cleveland as he was in Minnesota. But there was reasons for that. Just like Chris Bosh before him, Kevin Love was joining a LeBron James-led team, and he was going from the number one scoring option to a third scoring option. And in a LeBron James-led offense, where he likes to orchestrate things as a ball-dominant floor general, guys like Chris Bosh and Kevin Love are often relegated to roles where they have to sit on the perimeter, which wasn't their style before joining LeBron James. So many of LeBron's fans tend to be really young basketball fans, which makes sense considering the fact that he's still an active player in the NBA. But because of that, I think a lot of the people who are rooting for LeBron are not usually familiar with Kevin Love in his prime. Without mincing words, Love was an absolute beast in Minnesota. He really took off at the age of 22 in the 2010 to 2011 season, as he won the NBA's Most Improved Player award. And that year, he averaged over 20 points per game and put up a ridiculous league-leading average of 15.2 rebounds per game. Consider the fact that since the turn of the millennium, no player other than Andre Drummond and Ben Wallace have ever averaged more rebounds per game in a single season than Kevin Love. That's how good of a rebounder he was. He was also 47% from the field and a stellar 41.7% from three-point range. At such a young age, he was already in the conversation of the best power forward in the NBA. He was the league's best rebounder, a top scorer, an incredible passer, and one of the best shooting big men that the game had to offer. The very next year was the 2011 to 2012 lockout-shortened season. And that year, Love averaged 26 points, 13.3 rebounds, and 2 assists, while hitting 45% of his shots. He was so solid that season that he finished 6th overall in the MVP voting. He missed a significant amount of time the following season due to an injury, but the year after was the 2013 to 2014 season. At the age of 25, he averaged 26 points, 12.5 rebounds, and 4.4 assists, while making nearly 46% of his shots and 38% of his threes. Love was not only a great player, but he was legitimately viewed as one of the best players in the entire league, and at one point was even an MVP candidate for an organization that usually doesn't win very much. And then what some people try to do is they'll then try to discredit Kevin Love in Minnesota by making the point that he never even made the NBA playoffs before joining forces with LeBron James. But my point is the same thing can be said about Kyrie Irving, and we don't use that narrative against him. If you want to look at how good Kevin Love was in Minnesota, then consider his impact on the team before and after he was on the roster. In Love's final season with the Minnesota Timberwolves, where he put up about 26 points and 13 rebounds, they had a 40-42 record. And after he departed for Cleveland, Minnesota plummeted to a disgusting 16-66 record. LeBron James fans always like to bring up the fact of how good LeBron-led teams were when he was on the roster and how much they plummeted after he departed. But for some reason, that same logic doesn't apply to Kevin Love. It's almost as if it doesn't fit the agenda. Now listen, in no way is this video meant to come across as shade to LeBron James, because every superstar needs to have some help in order to win a championship. That is something I have always understood. So I don't see this video as a way of belittling a superstar just because I'm making a claim that a guy had help. But really what I'm trying to do is remind people to stop disrespecting Kevin Love. At one point, the guy was one of the best players in the entire league, and anyone who was watching him closely in that time could back me up on that. And even in Cleveland, it wasn't like he was garbage. In the 2016 to 2017 season, he averaged about 19 points and 11 rebounds and was an NBA All-Star. And the following season, he averaged nearly 19 points and 9 rebounds and was an All-Star then as well. Again, he just didn't have the role and the opportunities to put up the numbers he once put up in Minnesota. But that doesn't mean that they were fake, and that doesn't mean that he was never the real deal. It just simply means that his individual abilities thrived in one situation more so than another. So recently, I made a video talking about who I believed was the greatest victim of revisionist history, and that was Kevin Love. And a lot of my viewers actually enjoyed that video, but they asked me what were some other players who I thought had been affected by revisionist history, whether positively or negatively. And just to explain what I mean for a second, I'm talking about a player who was viewed one way during his NBA career and is now viewed in a wildly different light in the years since. I can think of a few examples, and I'm sure you guys can in the comment section as well, so let's get into it. First off is Chris Bosh. Similar to Kevin Love, he was a guy who initially benefited from being the go-to superstar on his own team, as he was a beast on the Toronto Raptors. But once he joined Dwayne Wade and LeBron James in Miami, he went from being the first scoring option to the third scoring option. And he also had to play in a new way that didn't match his ideal style, as he was pushed to the corner perimeter and was relegated to being a spot-up three-point shooter. Before that, he was a guy who really liked to make a play for himself and would sometimes go to work from the post. In this current day, he's seen now as a decent player but wasn't a superstar. He had a limited bag of skills, and in the time he was in Miami, he was the third man out, as it was really just a dynamic duo between LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. But how he was viewed back then was incredibly different, as he was seen as an elite power forward, and he was a guy who averaged roughly 24 points and 10 rebounds before he joined Miami. For goodness sake, he was third in the Eastern Conference in MVP votes, behind only LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, as he was an incredibly skilled and versatile superstar. Another guy who's experienced some revisionist history is actually Dirk Nowitzki, but the thing is, Dirk has actually benefited from the revisionist history. Nowitzki is seen now as a legendary player, as the best power forward of his era behind only Tim Duncan, and a lot of people think he was always a clutch, proven winner. But that's not really how he was seen back then. For a while, he was actually called Irk Nowitzki due to the lack of D in his game. His Mavericks choked a 2-0 lead to Wade in the NBA Finals in 2006. And then, his Mavericks choked the first round of the NBA playoffs against the 8-seeded Golden State Warriors in 2007, which is still one of the greatest upsets in postseason history. His Mavericks were making it to the NBA playoffs time and time again with well over 50 wins. They were usually between the first and third seed. So although they had championship expectations, they had been disappointed time and time again. And at a certain point, we just all accepted that they were fool's gold, and that they weren't truly championship caliber. The guy was seen as a talented superstar, but he was also seen as a choker and a defensive liability, and a guy who couldn't lead his team to the promised land when the games mattered the most. And then he won the championship in 2011, which was one of the greatest postseason runs of all time, which people agreed about then and they agree about now. But the thing is, people only remember that 2011 championship run, and it's essentially erased everything he ever did before that, and now that is the defining trait of his legacy. Whether it's fair or not, the reality is he is a product of revisionist history. Another player is Chris Webber. This power forward is seen now as a good player, but his choking kept him from being great. as he was a guy who was known for making crucial mistakes in the most crucial moments, going as far back to his days in college. Nowadays, people see him as clearly inferior to Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, and Kevin Garnett, and usually he's not even brought up among that class of power forwards. But back then, he was seen as a guy who was genuinely in the conversation for the best power forward in the entire league between the year 2000 and 2002. He was an MVP candidate as he was the leader of one of the most talented teams in the NBA. He was arguably the most offensively well-rounded big man in the entire league, as he could score, he could overpower players, he had a solid jumper, he was a fantastic passer, he handled the ball well in transition, and he was a pretty darn good rebounder as well. In reality, he was the leader of the team that nearly ended the Lakers dynasty, but as we all know, he got screwed in the playoffs. One can only imagine how much his reputation would change today if he had won that championship like he deserved in 2002. Another player is David Robinson. He's seen now as a guy who is clearly inferior to Hakeem Olajuwon and Shaquille O'Neal, and he always has been. People see him as a choker who was carried to a championship by Tim Duncan. Basically, his entire legacy is seen through the lens of his failure against Hakeem Olajuwon in the 1995 NBA playoffs. Unfortunately, some of those crucial moments have completely overshadowed how he was seen back then. At that time, he had an argument for the title of the best big man in the entire NBA, and the battle between him and Hakeem Olajuwon was a legit debate. He regularly led his San Antonio Spurs to 50 or 60 wins for basically a decade straight, but he just needed a bit more help to win a championship. He was seen as possibly the greatest defensive player of his era, and in the 1999 NBA championship run, he was seen as a co-star to Tim Duncan, as he was a 15 points, 10 rebounds type of guy while being the more impactful defensive player, as he even finished ahead of Tim Duncan in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. And the last guy I have on my list is Isaiah Thomas, who was the leader of the bad boy Detroit Pistons, who won back-to-back championships in 1989 and in 1990. But unfortunately, Isaiah is seen now as pretty much an asshole. He's seen as a poor sport, and his jealousy of MJ is basically his defining trait. People will say that he was an inefficient scorer, and he was nowhere close to the best players in the entire league. The thing is, my childhood was defined by the VHS tapes that I watched of the games my dad recorded from the 1980s playoffs. I witnessed his skills, I witnessed his greatness, and I became familiar with the way they talked about him during that era. Back then, people thought he was genuinely just one small step behind Magic Johnson and Larry Bird for the title of the best player. He was clutch as hell, and he was a leader. He could dominate the game with his scoring or facilitating. The common narrative about him was that he was a very likable guy who was always playing with a smile, but he just played alongside of a bunch of assholes, like Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn. So now you've heard the guys that I think are the greatest examples of players who were affected by revisionist history. What are some of those players to you? So today's video is kind of an interesting topic, and I gotta be real with you guys. Every once in a while, I like to make a video that's more conversational, that's more relational. Sometimes I don't just want to give this big ol' lesson, telling you guys unique information or telling you how to think about basketball, but sometimes I like to just throw out a unique idea or a unique way of thinking about the game of basketball and getting you guys to dialogue with me in the comments section. The reason why is because we really have something unique in this corner of the internet. I really think almost everybody who subscribed to my channel is a basketball superfan. This is a highly concentrated community of some real hardcore hoop heads. So sometimes it's just fun to hear your guys' thoughts as well. So let me get into my next point. As many of you know on this channel, I am a Lakers fan, and I have been my entire life. And sometimes that fact does get pretty annoying on this channel. I do talk about the Lakers more than any other team on this channel. I kind of feel like that's just normal. I'm sorry, I'm a fan. I know more about them than literally any other organization. It just is what it is. So obviously, from my highly biased perspective, I see my team as the good guys. And I'm sure all of you guys see your team as the good guys. But every once in a while, something unique or weird happens in the National Basketball Association, and now you're rooting for someone else. You're rooting for, quote, the bad guys. I have 3 very specific instances in the history of my basketball fandom where I was passionately rooting for someone other than my Lakers. So I'm going to get into those, but please, let me know in the comment section below who you're a fan of and what was an instance where you were rooting for someone else. First off, I was rooting for the Dallas Mavericks in the 2006 NBA Finals. You'll remember that Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks made it all the way to the NBA Finals in 2006, where they famously ran into Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal of the Miami Heat. The Lakers had been eliminated out of the first round of the playoffs by the Phoenix Suns, so obviously they hadn't been a part of this equation for quite a while at this point, regardless of the fact that Kobe had an incredible individual season as he averaged 35 points and was first-team All-Defense. With that being said, the Shaq and Kobe split was still fresh in our memories. And although I love Shaq for what he did in Los Angeles, to say his split was ugly with the organization would be a monumental understatement. For a while, Shaq suddenly became public enemy number 1, and that meant whoever was going against him was suddenly my favorite team. This was the case for the Mavericks in 2006, as they got off to a 2-0 lead to start the series. But obviously, you know how it all went. Dwayne Wade was absolutely incredible, as he put on one of the greatest finals performances of all time. So yeah, unfortunately this one ended in disappointment, and even I was wondering whether or not Kobe would ever catch up to Shaq in championship rings. Now here's the interesting thing. The second time I was rooting for someone other than the Lakers, it was again the Dallas Mavericks, this time in 2011. After LeBron's decision, I hated this guy. Everybody was debating whether or not Kobe or LeBron was the best player in the NBA at this point in time. But in my mind, he basically just took the easy road by joining Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami. Not only that, but the Dallas Mavericks had swept my Lakers out of the NBA playoffs. So if Kobe just got swept, and then LeBron went on to beat this Mavericks team, that would make it feel even more painful, because then some people can make the argument that LeBron was able to do what Kobe couldn't. I was also still a little bit bitter that LeBron didn't join the New York Knicks after flirting with that organization for so long, and low-key, I wanted the Knicks to be relevant again, but instead I was having to root against the Heat once again. This time, I actually got my wish, as Dirk Nowitzki stepped up and completed one of the most impressive championship runs of all time, as they upset the super team Miami Heat. What I think is really funny about this instance is, as a Lakers fan, I was definitely rooting for the Mavericks in this point in time, but I've heard that some fellow Laker fans were actually rooting for the Heat due to the fact that the Dallas Mavericks had just swept us. At the end of the day, I guess it's all about perspective. The third instance where I was passionately rooting for someone other than my Lakers was when I was rooting for LeBron and the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2016. Now some of you are going to be surprised by this, because in my last instance I was definitely rooting against LeBron. So how had I turned around in just a matter of 5 years? Well, I thought it would be a cool storybook ending for LeBron to finally bring a championship to Cleveland. But there's a lot more personal context here. At this point in my life, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. All my friends at church, basketball group, everywhere I went was Golden State Warriors fans, who were constantly gloating about the fact that they had the back-to-back MVP winner and had a 73-9 season, while my Lakers were experiencing their worst season in franchise history. In Kobe's farewell season, the Lakers finished with a 17-65 record. Whenever I'd wear my Lakers gear, whether I was at work doing construction or I was hanging out with my friends, I was always getting teased for how much my team sucked and for how much better their Warriors were. So, when the 2016 finals came along, I had a lot of bitterness towards those Bay Area fans. And when the opportunity arose for them to blow a 3-1 lead, no one was more excited than I was. To this day, their misery at the end of Game 7 gives me complete joy. And it's funny because I think a lot of people would assume that I was rooting against LeBron in this instance. But outside of Cleveland, I might have been the happiest person alive due to the fact that he won. Richie Guerin. This 6'4" shooting guard is a New York Knicks legend who played in the NBA from 1957 to 1970. Despite starting his career during the NBA's infancy, he had some skills that were way ahead of his time, as he had a quality handle, a lightning-quick first step, and had a great change of pace ability. During his prime, this guy was a walking bucket, and in the 1961-62 season, he averaged nearly 30 points, 7 assists, and 6 rebounds, while hitting 44% of his shots. Simply put, he was one of the most explosive offensive players that you've never heard about. Like on December 11th, 1959, when he dropped 57 points, 12 rebounds, and 8 assists on 58% shooting. He's a Hall of Famer who made 6 All-Star teams, and his legacy is certainly worth preserving. Tim Hardaway. This guy had one of the filthiest handles in basketball history, as he had some tremendous skills and backed it up as one of the most aggressive trash talkers in the entire league. This 6-foot point guard was a dangerous two-way threat, as he could score in bunches while being one of the best facilitators in the entire league. The best years of his career were in Golden State and Miami, and in that time he made 5 All-Star teams and 5 All-NBA teams. At his individual best in 1992, as a member of the Run TMC Warriors, he averaged 23 points, 10 assists, 4 rebounds, and 2 steals, on 46% shooting from the field, as he finished 8th overall in the MVP voting. He even got as high as 4th in the MVP voting in 1997 as a member of the Miami Heat. He also loved to shoot the 3-ball, as he was usually among the league leaders in attempts per game. He's definitely a tier below the greatest point guards in NBA history, but on any given night, he could be the best player on the court. Ron Harper. He's one of those unique players who's most famously remembered for a part of his career that was outside of his prime, which was obviously during his 3-championship stint as the Bulls' starting point guard. But before that, he was actually a solid 2-guard who was leaned upon heavily offensively. Standing at 6'6", he was a solid jump shooter who could slash and finish above the rim. His best seasons individually were on the Clippers and Cavaliers, and arguably his best season was his rookie year in Cleveland, where he played all 82 games and averaged 23 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2.5 steals on 45% shooting. Connie Hawkins. This 6'8" small forward was simply a dynamic superstar. He started his career in the ABA and won the league MVP in his rookie season, as he efficiently averaged 27 points, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists, while leading the Pittsburgh Pipers to the ABA championship, in what was one of the most impressive rookie campaigns in sports history. In his second season, he was the MVP runner-up, as he averaged 30, 11, and 4. But what about his basketball skills specifically? Well, Hawkins was a fantastic mid-range shooter, and he was utterly dangerous around the rim. He was similar to Julius Erving and George Gervin in the way he glided through the air, had tremendous body control, and had a filthy finger roll. He was also extremely similar to Michael Jordan, from the standpoint that he had ridiculously huge hands, which he often used to throw defenders off with his one-handed ball fakes. In total, he made 6 All-Star teams, mostly for the Phoenix Suns, on his way to the Basketball Hall of Fame. Hersey Hawkins. This 6'3" 2-guard was one of the best supporting stars throughout his career. He moved around quite a bit throughout his playing days, but his individual best was in his early years in Philadelphia, where he was an NBA All-Star in 1991, as he averaged 22, 4, and 4 on 47% shooting. He was also an elite 3-point shooter, as he hit nearly 40% of his attempts throughout his career. Most famously, he played for the Seattle Supersonics in 1996, who made it all the way to the NBA Finals. He was a starter and a major scorer for that group, but for some reason, people always act like Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp were the only stars on that squad. Craig Hodges. He's one of the great yet forgotten role-playing teammates of Michael Jordan's career, as Hodges was a member of the Bulls between 1988 and 1992. To put it simply, Hodges was a spot-up shooting assassin and was one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history. He's tied with Larry Bird for the most three-point contests won with a total of 3, and he still holds the record for the most consecutive shots made in the history of that contest, as he made 19 straight in 1991. And the closest to that feat is Steph Curry in 2015 with a streak of just 13. During the actual games, Hodges was a 40% three-point shooter and led the league in three-point efficiency twice, getting as high as a whopping 49.1% in 1988. He'd certainly be a household name if he played in this modern NBA. Allen Houston. Longtime Knicks fans remember this guy quite well. Houston was a 6'6" shooting guard who could light up the scoreboard in a short amount of time. In his prime for the Knicks, he was one of the most efficient shooting guards in the entire league, both from the free throw line and from three-point range. He was also a volume three-point shooter who hit over 40% of his attempts throughout his career. He was the team's top overall scorer during their NBA Finals run in 1999, and he made 2 All-Star teams as a guy who was averaging around 20 points per game. And that was during some of the lowest scoring seasons in NBA history. Dan Issel. He was a 6'9" center/power forward who was very aggressive about getting to the rim. But when he happened to settle on the perimeter, he was one of the best jump shooters the league had to offer. He played in both the ABA and the NBA, and especially in his early years, he was a monster statistically. He led the ABA in scoring in his rookie season in 1971, as he averaged 30 points, 13 rebounds, and 2 assists on 48% shooting. After his move to the NBA, he went on to be a star player for the Denver Nuggets. He has quite the stacked resume, as he was a 7-time All-Star, the Rookie of the Year winner, the 1975 ABA champion, won the All-Star Game MVP in 1972, has a scoring title, and is a Basketball Hall of Famer. Recently, the NBA lost a legend who wasn't just a famous icon within the sport, but he was literally the unofficial logo of the game of basketball, Jerry Allen West. He was 86 years old and has been having a tremendous impact on the league longer than most of us have been alive. As a player, this 6'3" point guard/shooting guard was one of the greatest players of his generation and on both ends of the court. His style of play offensively was so ahead of his time in the 60s and early 70s, as he had a solid handle of the basketball and had a dangerous pull-up jumper that would have translated well to the modern NBA. He was teammates with the great Elgin Baylor in 12 out of his 14 seasons in the league, and as a dynamic duo, they both had unique impacts on their offense. The famous longtime Lakers commentator Chick Hearn referred to Baylor as Mr. Inside, while West was Mr. Outside. Jerry didn't have the luxury of playing in the three-point era since he retired in 1974, and the three-point line wasn't introduced to the league until 1979. One can only imagine how many points per game West would have averaged if many of his perimeter jumpers had counted as 3 points instead. Among players with completed careers, West has the 4th highest scoring average in NBA history at 27. He has the 5th highest playoff scoring average of all time at 29.1, and he has the 5th highest final scoring average of all time at 30.5. One of those was in the 1965 NBA playoffs, where West's Lakers made it to the NBA Finals, where they were eventually defeated by the Boston Celtics. In that entire playoff run, West averaged 40.6 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. Jerry played in 11 games in those playoffs, and with a minimum of 4 games played, that is the highest scoring average in a single postseason run in NBA history. Another example of his clutch gene was the 1969 NBA Finals, where West had arguably the greatest final series that the league had ever seen. In Game 1, he carried his Lakers to a clutch 2-point victory, where he efficiently dropped 53 points and 10 assists. He ended up scoring 40 points in 4 out of those 7 games. In the 7th and deciding game, he made history, as he dropped 42 points, 13 rebounds, and 12 assists. To this day, West is one of only 3 players to achieve the 40-point triple-double in the NBA Finals, and West is the only player to ever do it in a 7th game. He put up monstrous numbers over the course of that series, but unfortunately, West's Lakers lost in the 7th game by just 2 points. Regardless, his series-long performance was so legendary that he was named the Finals MVP, despite the fact that he played for the losing team. To this day, West is the only player to ever win the Finals MVP while playing for the losing side. Beyond being extremely productive in big games, West was basically automatic in the final few seconds, and his career was filled with game winners and buzzer beaters. None more famous than when he made this 60-foot shot in Game 3 of the 1970 NBA Finals as time expired, and this sent the game to overtime. At this point, you might be thinking that West was basically just a scorer, but you couldn't possibly be more incorrect. He was an elite passer, and especially in the second half of his career, he focused more of his game on his facilitating. In the 1971-72 season, the Lakers had a really talented group, with guys like Wilt Chamberlain, Gail Goodrich, and Jim McMillan as the supporting cast to West. Their brand new head coach was the Hall of Famer Bill Sharman, who actually competed against West in the past as a player for the Boston Celtics. Sharman wanted to run an up-tempo offense, and wanted West to spend more of his energy facilitating. As the floor general, Jerry led the 72 Lakers to a historic run, as he led the entire league in assists per game at 9.7, while also pouring in 26 points and 4 rebounds. West led the Lakers to the greatest winning streak in basketball history, as they won a whopping 33 straight regular season games before finishing the season with a 69-13 record. With Jerry at the helm, the Lakers had a 12-3 record that postseason, as they won the NBA championship and solidified their case for the title of the greatest team in NBA history. With this ring, West had finally broken through and won that elusive championship, after years of falling to Bill Russell and the more talented Boston Celtics. In fact, West had a 1-8 NBA Finals record, which has led many modern fans to question the legitimacy of his Mr. Clutch nickname. But when you understand the context of his era, and the fact that the opposing Celtics were loaded with way more Hall of Famers, while West was still playing incredible in his losing performances, then it starts to make a bit more sense. Easily, the most underrated part of his game, though, was his all-time great defense. Jerry was known by his peers as a smothering defensive player, and was especially skilled at causing turnovers. Simply put, he was one of the greatest pickpockets in the history of the game, and he was one of the greatest shot-blocking guards that the game had ever seen as well. Unfortunately, he simply played in the wrong era for all of his defensive stats and accolades to be tracked. For one, blocks and steals were not officially tracked until the 1973-74 season, which just happened to be West's final year in the NBA at the age of 35. But in that farewell season, he averaged a stunning 2.6 steals and 0.7 blocks, and both of those were good enough to lead the league at his position. If those were the kind of defensive numbers that he was putting up at the age of 35, then I can only imagine how many he was getting during his prime. Beyond that, he made a total of 5 all-defense teams in his career, but all 5 of those honors came after he entered his 30s, since all-defense teams did not exist prior to the 1968-69 season. So not only should he be among the all-time leaders in steals, not only should he be among the all-time blocks leaders for guards, but he could possibly have had the most all-defense team selections for any guard of all time, if the honors had always existed. To put it simply, he was one of the greatest all-around players that the game has ever seen. In total, he earned 14 All-Star selections, 5 all-defense teams, won the scoring title in 1970, won the assist title in 1972, was the Finals MVP in 1969, and won the NBA championship in 1972. Again, he achieved all of this as a perimeter shooter at a time when the three-point line didn't exist yet. Imagine what his resume would look like if it had. Now here's the craziest part. All of that might have been the less impressive part of Jerry West's basketball career, because soon after his career was done as a player, he moved into head coaching and executive positions. Just 2 seasons after his retirement, he was hired to be the Lakers' head coach, thanks to his good relationship with the team's owner and thanks to his excellent leadership skills he displayed while playing for the Purple and Gold. After the Lakers had failed to make the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, West stepped in and coached the Lakers to 3 straight playoff appearances, including a trip to the Western Conference Finals in his first year at the helm. Now, after those 3 coaching seasons were done, he moved into a different role that he was more passionate about, which was a lead scout. For 3 years, he evaluated talent and helped the Lakers organization make selections that would build their next dynasty. Eventually, he got promoted and became the general manager of the Los Angeles Lakers in 1982. And one of the first major moves he made in that position was drafting big game James Worthy in the 1982 NBA draft. Worthy was the perfect complementary star to Magic Johnson's fast-paced offense. With the team, Worthy would go on to win 3 championships in Los Angeles, including the season where he was the Finals MVP in 1988. After the retirement of Magic Johnson in 1991, the Lakers' future was in question. But West quickly rebuilt the team into a competitive force and had them in the conference semifinals by 1995. That year, he was honored as the NBA Executive of the Year. But he was just getting started. Under his leadership, the Lakers were ready to take the next step, and in a major way. On July 11th, 1996, West made an extremely bold move, as he traded the Lakers starting center Vlade Divac for a 17-year-old fresh out of high school Kobe Bryant. This was an extremely gutsy move at the time, because Kobe was seen as a bit of an unproven wild card, while Vlade was the team's starting center when they went to the 1991 NBA Finals. Although the Lakers traded for Kobe from the Hornets, who took him with the 13th overall pick, West has said that he would have taken Kobe with the 1st overall pick if he had the choice. Now the Lakers were without a starting center, and West looked to fill that role rather quickly, and he did it in a very explosive fashion. Just 1 week later, West shocked the basketball world by convincing Shaquille O'Neal to leave the Orlando Magic and sign with the Los Angeles Lakers. And just like that, West had built the foundation of a dynasty yet again. Shaq and Kobe would go on to win 3 championships together in 4 finals appearances. And after the Diesel's departure, Kobe would go on to win 2 more additional championships. Obviously, West's impact and influence as a Laker great had been immortalized. When you look at the combination of his playing career, his coaching career, and his executive career, he's probably the favorite for the title of the greatest overall Laker in franchise history. But he wasn't done having an impact on the game of basketball. Seeking more mountains to climb and conquer, West became the general manager of the Memphis Grizzlies between 2002 and 2007. In that time, he built a surprisingly competitive squad that was able to make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. In fact, they went to the playoffs for 3 straight seasons under West. After a 4-year break, West joined the Golden State Warriors in 2011 as an executive board member and as a minority owner. He helped build the Dubs into yet another dynasty team. One of his more influential decisions came in 2014, when the Warriors were considering trading a young and upcoming Klay Thompson for a prime Kevin Love, who at the time was seen as one of the best bigs in the entire league. Jerry West was extremely opposed to his team trading Klay, and threatened to leave the organization if they made the deal. In light of this, the Warriors decided to keep Klay, and would go on to win 4 NBA championships for the Golden State Warriors. But that wasn't his only major contribution to the Dubs dynasty, as he was a major part of the recruitment pitch to sign Kevin Durant in 2016. After that, West was once again seeking yet another challenge, and decided to join the LA Clippers in 2017 as an executive board member and as a consultant. Although that team never became a dynasty under his watch, he did help them acquire lots of star power that translated into them being Western Conference contenders. In total, he won 1 championship as a player and 8 championships as an executive. But in reality, he contributed to way more titles than just that. Looking at his full resume, we have to ask ourselves, has there ever been one person who's been more influential to shaping the NBA's history than Jerry West? Honestly, it would be hard for me to say yes. Sadly, the NBA lost one of the greatest basketball minds of all time, and although he unofficially became the logo because of his playing career, in reality, he's a symbol of the game of basketball for so many reasons beyond that. West was the embodiment of a competitive spirit. You'll never find anyone more passionate about the game of basketball. Even well into his 80s, he never stopped seeking new challenges. He never stopped finding new ways to win. In a way, he was everything that basketball lovers aspire to be. He was driven, he was relentless, he was passionate, he was team-focused, and above all, he was a winner, all the way up to the very end. As a lifelong Lakers fan, and as a basketball fan in general, thank you for everything, Jerry West. So many of our smiles, so many of our victories, and so many of our days rejoicing all go back to you. People may argue about who the logo should be for years to come, but for obvious reasons, you'll always be the logo to me. John was known for several things throughout his legendary career. He was a leader, a workhorse with incredible stamina, and he was one of the most clutch performers the NBA has ever seen. Whenever the Celtics needed a big game or a big play, John was often the man who provided it for them. He was drafted out of Ohio State University in the 1962 NBA draft. When John was drafted by the Boston Celtics, he was known mainly as a defensive player from his college days. But now, he was playing with the very talented Boston Celtics. With Boston loaded with stars, very often the defense would sag off on John, daring him to shoot the ball. His legendary head coach, Red Auerbach, told him that he shouldn't let the defense disrespect him like that, and that Havlicek needed to be more aggressive offensively. This bit of advice completely changed his career, to say the least. Not only did he look to score more, but he became one of the best scorers the NBA had to offer, and currently has the 7th most shot attempts in NBA history. He was a 13-time All-Star with 11 All-NBA selections, and he was the 1974 Finals MVP. He was a scoring wing player with a smooth jump shot, and he was a tenacious and scrappy defender who often forced his opponent into turnovers, none more famous than in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals between his Celtics and Wilt Chamberlain's 76ers. With a game and a trip to the NBA Finals on the line, Hal Greer was inbounding the ball. The Celtics were leading by 1 point when John Havlicek made one of the most famous defensive plays in NBA history. He anticipated the pass and stole the ball, sending the Celtics to the finals where they would go on to win one of his astonishing 8 NBA championships. People frequently talk about Michael Jordan's undefeated 6-0 NBA Finals record, but there are actually 3 players in league history who have an even greater finals record than Jordan, and one of them is John Havlicek, who finished with an 8-0 record. He was the Finals MVP in 1974 with a stat line of 26.4 points, 7.7 rebounds, 4.7 assists, and 1.9 steals on 42.9% shooting. The thing is, yes, Havlicek was the Finals MVP in 1974, but that was one of the few championship seasons where the Finals MVP actually existed and was available to him. If the award had always existed throughout his career, he would definitely have multiple Finals MVPs to his name, with the 1968 Finals and the 1969 Finals being 2 of his standout performances. Bill Russell is obviously remembered as the leader and the iconic cornerstone of the Celtics dynasty, as he should be, but it is worth acknowledging that Russell had the luxury of leading upon his teammates offensively, while he focused more on what he was best at, defense and rebounding. One of those players he leaned upon heavily was Havlicek, who at one point led his loaded Celtics in scoring for 6 consecutive seasons. On top of all of this, he was also one of the elite wing defenders of league history with his 8 all-defense teams. But that stat only tells one portion of the story. In his first 11 seasons in the NBA, the league wasn't tracking any blocks or steals, which kept him from ranking high on the all-time lists. The Defensive Player of the Year award also didn't exist until years after he retired. So as impressive as his career resume is, in reality, it should be recognized as significantly better. He played 16 reliable seasons with the Celtics and never once played less than 70 games in a season. For his career, he averaged 20.8 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 4.8 assists per game. But during his prime season, he was averaging nearly a triple-double of 29 points, 9 rebounds, and over 7 assists, while playing a remarkable 45 minutes per game. Outside of Bill Russell, you could argue that no other player was more pivotal to the Celtics' success in the 60s and 70s than John Havlicek. He's still the Boston Celtics all-time leader in points and field goals made. He's second in assists and fifth in rebounds. He's ranked fourth all-time behind Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki, and Tim Duncan in points scored by a player who spent his entire career with one franchise. Havlicek was one of 10 players in NBA history to make at least 8 All-NBA teams and 8 All-Defensive teams. The other 9 are Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, David Robinson, Kevin Garnett, Gary Payton, and Chris Paul. That's some pretty legendary company. On top of all of this, John was known as a wonderful teammate and human being. In a statement released by the Celtics organization shortly after his passing, they said, "His defining traits as a player were his relentless hustle and wholehearted commitment to team over self. He was extraordinarily thoughtful and generous, both on a personal level and for those in need, as illustrated by his commitment to raising money for the Genesis Foundation for Children for over 3 decades through his fishing tournament. John was kind, considerate, humble, and gracious. He was a champion in every sense." John Hondo Havlicek will be remembered in NBA history as a terrific ambassador of the game and as the quintessential Boston Celtic. So every once in a while, there's this weird thing that happens in basketball media where everyone seems to be dogpiling on one specific player or on one specific legend simultaneously. We've been witnessing that fairly recently, and in this case, Shaquille O'Neal is the target. So there's 3 instances that I want to talk about. The first is the debate on First Take between Stephen A. and Mad Dog. The second is what Bill Simmons said recently on his podcast, where he compared the modern Joel Embiid to Shaquille O'Neal. And third is the thing Shaquille O'Neal has been saying about himself. Yes, believe it or not, I have Shaq as one of the people who needs to stop disrespecting the legacy of Shaquille O'Neal. First off, let's tackle the perspective of Mad Dog on First Take. Take a listen to his thoughts on the Diesel.
First off, we got to hear Shaq now do this. Shaq is what? The 5th best center in the history of the NBA? Fifth.
What?
Shaq. What do you mean, what?
Who's the 4 ahead of Shaquille O'Neal? Have
like
you lost your damn mind?
You want me to name him for you? What? You want me to name him?
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
Kareem.
Okay.
Yeah. Wilt.
No. I'm not giving it to Wilt.
No, you guys are crazy.
No. I'm not giving it to Wilt.
No. You're not going to put Wilt Chamberlain, who averaged 50 points a game and scored 100 a game in 30 minutes.
Who was a foot taller than 99% of the league?
Yeah.
The
most
dominant player in NBA history. Who was stopping Shaquille O'Neal in any era?
And who's Tim Duncan is better than he is. Tim Duncan's better. And I tell you something, 2 other guys.
That's not a center. Tim Duncan's
Olajuwon is better. Who beat him 4 straight games.
2-time champion of Shaq's 4. No scoring titles to Shaq's 2. What are you talking about?
And I tell you somebody else who's better. You can laugh all you want.
I love Hakeem, but he won Shaq.
Oh, he's a better player than Shaq. Oh, God, he's better. First off, he played Shaq and he beat him 4 straight games.
Define me better player.
He's not better than Moses Malone.
What?
There's no chance. Don't give me that.
Oh my Lord! Why are you allowed to talk basketball? Why? I love Moses Malone. Elite rebounder.
You think Shaq?
Moses Malone was not Shaq.
Not a chance.
And he was great, but he wasn't Shaq.
Help, Lord. Malone led the league in rebounding 6 consecutive years.
So what?
He won 2 MVPs.
So now that you've seen this recent episode of grown adults screaming at each other, what are some takeaways? Well, for one, Mad Dog said that Shaq was the 5th greatest center ever, but then he went on to name 5 players ahead of him, which were Kareem, Wilt Chamberlain, Tim Duncan, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Moses Malone. Naturally, this would place Shaq as the 6th greatest center ever, even though he said 5th. Whether or not you consider Tim Duncan primarily as a power forward or a center is certainly debatable, so I won't fault people either way on that one. Now I've got to point out, when Mad Dog said Wilt Chamberlain, Stephen A. Smith responded with one of my biggest pet peeves in basketball, as he stated that Wilt Chamberlain was a foot taller than 99% of the league. This isn't even close to being true, and if you want to hear my breakdown of that, check out my recent video that exposes this myth. Hakeem Olajuwon is an interesting one to have ahead of Shaq, and honestly, I go back and forth on this ranking. Mad Dog states that Hakeem swept Shaq in 4 straight games, and he's correct on that, as the Rockets won the 1995 championship over Shaq's Orlando Magic. But using that as a way of saying Hakeem is better is way too simplistic. For one, although Shaq was incredible, he wasn't yet in his peak form, which he later experienced in Los Angeles. That matchup was between an experienced 32-year-old Hakeem Olajuwon versus a young and developing 23-year-old Shaq. So that's not the most fair comparison when you're looking at their careers as a whole. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that saying that the Rockets swept the Magic is the far more accurate way of stating it, rather than saying that Hakeem swept Shaq. Because if you watched that series, and if you look at their production, you'll see that it was a pretty even battle with a slight edge to Hakeem. Over that series, the Dream averaged about 33, 11, and 5 on 48% shooting from the field, while Shaq put up 28, 12, and 6 on 59%. Beyond that series, Stephen A. mentions that Shaq has 4 rings to Hakeem's 2, which is true, but Hakeem didn't have the luxury of playing alongside of a lethal Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade during his prime years. So again, maybe not the most fair comparison. Shaq did have 2 scoring titles, but Hakeem has 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, which is something that Shaq never achieved. Personally, I think Hakeem is the greatest defensive player since Bill Russell, and it's a large gap between second and third. Honestly, I have no problem with either Shaq or Olajuwon being ranked higher, and I can make an argument either way. But then he took it to another level entirely when he said Moses Malone. Listen, I'm a little frustrated he said this because I personally believe that Moses is usually one of the top 3 most underrated players of all time. But naturally, by pitting him against Shaquille O'Neal, he's inviting people to criticize him instead of appreciate him. Moses was simply one of the greatest rebounders of all time, and as Mad Dog said, he led the NBA in rebounding 6 times in his career, which is a feat that Shaq could only dream of, as he never led the NBA in rebounding. With that being said, Shaq is without question a better rim protector than Moses, and he's a vastly better scorer as well. In Moses Malone's lengthy career, he only had 2 seasons where he averaged at least 26 points per game. On the other hand, Shaq did that every season for 10 years straight. Add on the fact that Shaq has 4 championships to Moses' 1 and 14 All-NBA teams to Moses' 8, and yeah, Shaq is without question higher on the all-time list. People forget that for 3 or 4 straight years of basketball, every team outside of Los Angeles was trying to stop Shaq, and would spend entire off-seasons making moves to adjust to him. He was the league's gravitational pull during his best in the NBA, and nowadays people are taking that for granted. Now that ESPN clip wasn't the most disrespectful thing to Shaq in this video, it's this next one. Take a listen to these recent comments from Bill Simmons on his podcast.
This Embiid season though, just quickly, holy shit. So he's averaging 35 points a game. I think he's the best offensive center since Kareem in 1972. Kareem in 72, 34.8 points a game, 57% field goal. Embiid is 35 points a game, 55% field goal. Here's the thing. Termini mentioned this last week on the podcast, and this is the most important Embiid point, and this is why he has a case for being the best offensive scoring center that we've seen since Wilt Chamberlain. He makes his free throws. He's at 89.3% for his free throws this year. He's making 10.3 free throws a game out of 11.6 attempts. Shaq in 2000, Shaq averaged 29.7 points a game in his MVP season in 2000. Embiid was 35 points a game. Shaq was 57% from field goals. Embiid's 55. What's the difference? Shaq made 5.5 out of 10.4 free throws a game. Embiid makes almost 5 more free throws a game, which is exactly the difference in their points per game. And on top of it, you can't foul him at the end of games. So I have Shaq, I don't know, he's like 12th or 13th in my pantheon. At least this version of Embiid right now is just a better player than Shaq. He is. Because Shaq was a 44-minute overpowering guy, and in the playoffs against the wrong team, whatever. But those last 4 minutes, that's when Kobe was so important, and you know all that stuff. But Shaq's free throw shooting was an absolute unequivocal liability for them. And Embiid's free throw shooting is a legitimate strength for the Sixers. So, Jesus, 35 points a game and shooting almost 90% from 3, and you're 7'2". Unbelievable.
All right, now before I pick this apart, I want you to understand I'm actually a big fan of Bill Simmons. In many ways, I admire this guy, considering how he's simply a basketball superfan who built his brand on the power of his passion. In many ways, I'm trying to follow the path that he set out. This is also my copy of the Book of Basketball, which is a book he wrote and is an awesome read. So with all of these things considered, I'm actually surprised to hear him make such a casual conclusion in this instance. Looking at different eras and seeing a recent guy averaging 35 and one guy averaging 30, and then concluding that the more recent guy is better simply because 35 is higher than 30 is one of the most surface level takes that I've heard. Since the NBA merger in 1976, this is the highest scoring NBA season ever. In today's NBA, teams are averaging 115.5 points per game, and in Shaq's 99-2000 MVP season, teams were averaging only 97.5 points per game. And in all of Shaq's seasons with the Lakers, that was the only year where the league average was above 97 points. For a multitude of reasons, offensive statistics are ridiculously inflated in the modern game. There's triple-doubles galore, there's back-to-back 20-point and 20-assist nights, 40 and 50-point games are a nightly occurrence, and a rookie flirted with a quadruple-double while having a minutes restriction. In the modern season, 14 players are averaging at least 26 points per game, and in Shaq's MVP season, he was one of only 2 players to average at least 26. I'm writing this script on January 1st, 2024, and as of this moment, there have been 462 30-point games in the 2023-2024 season. In the totality of the 1999-2000 season, there was a total of 502 30-point games. So obviously, the total is close. But it shouldn't be, considering the fact that modern teams are only 32 games into the 82-game regular season. This means that this current year will far exceed the amount of 30-point performances of the entire 99-2000 season, well before we've even hit the halfway point. If that doesn't tell you how inflated today's stats are, then nothing will. The numbers being inflated is just one of 3 reasons why these comments are ridiculous by Bill Simmons. The second reason is because it's insanely premature. We are just over 1/3 into an NBA regular season, and we're giving someone the title of the greatest scoring center since Kareem, simply because of what he's done in a very small sample size. 32 games into the 2019-2020 NBA season, James Harden was averaging a whopping 38.3 points per game. People were speculating if he would average 40 that year, and at that point, some were even referring to him as the greatest scorer since Michael Jordan. But then, he dropped off significantly, and averaged just 30.8 points for the rest of the year, dropping his seasonal average to 34.3. Now in hindsight, those comments about Harden look ridiculous, and people can now see how these analysts were slaves of the moment. Listen, I don't care if it's 1964, 1994, or 2024. Averaging 35 points per game on tremendous efficiency is incredibly impressive and worth appreciating. And from that perspective, Joel Embiid certainly deserves his due credit. But if you're gonna give him the title of the greatest offensive center since Kareem, then you can't just ignore the context of the era, like the faster pace of play, like the existence of the defensive 3-second rule which opens up the painted area, and the less frequent calls for traveling. The third reason why Bill's comments are absurd is because, good God, the playoffs actually matter. How are you going to give someone the title of the greatest offensive player when that same player isn't even great when the games actually matter? In the entire 2023 playoffs, Embiid averaged just 23.7 points on 43.1% shooting and 17.9% from three-point range. In the entire 2022 playoffs, Embiid averaged 23.6 points on 48.4% shooting and 21.2% from three-point range. He's in his late 20s, and these are the prime years of his career, yet he has a tendency of coming up incredibly small offensively in the playoffs. Meanwhile, these were the averages that Shaq was putting up for 3 years in the NBA Finals at this same age, and at a time that producing offense was much more difficult. Plain and simple, this shouldn't even be a conversation. What Embiid is doing roughly a third into the regular season is impressive, but he hasn't yet earned his way into the conversation with Shaq of the greatest scoring center since Kareem. So at this point of the video, we've seen ESPN analysts disrespect Shaq, we've seen a podcaster disrespect Shaq, and now we're going to take a look at Shaq disrespecting Shaq. When it comes to personalities, the Diesel is one of the most fascinating ones that I've ever followed. He almost seems bipolar at points. Sometimes he's the most egotistical person in the room. As he'll flaunt his 4 rings, he'll declare himself as the most dominant player ever, and he'll speak of himself in third person. But then at other times, you won't find a more humble athlete. Shaq recently said that Steph Curry is better than him. Years ago, he said that Giannis was better than him at the same age. He said that Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Hakeem Olajuwon were all better. Recently, he said that at no point was he ever better than Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade, which is crazy when you consider how he was once teammates with a fresh out of high school Kobe Bryant, who was averaging just 7 points, while Shaq was averaging 26 and 12. In 2001, he said that Kobe was the best player in the world, despite the fact that Shaq was the defending MVP and Finals MVP. In 1997, he tried to decline his spot among the 50 greatest players of all time, so a more veteran player could take his spot. I'm a big believer in letting others praise you and not doing it yourself, but at the same time, Shaq's humility and dismissiveness of himself has gone so far that I think it's starting to affect how he's remembered. This was a guy who was 1 vote away from a unanimous MVP. This is a guy who averaged 35 and 15 over 3 straight NBA Finals, which is a championship accomplishment that can only be rivaled by the great Michael Jordan. Shaq was a guy who shaped the Western Conference in the early 2000s, and sure, he wasn't a great foul shooter, but I've never seen a player put more bodies in foul trouble than Shaq did at his peak. Shannon Sharpe and many other talking heads have regurgitated the narrative that Shaq didn't have great longevity due to his lack of fitness. And although that's true to a small extent, it's definitely massively overblown. For goodness sake, Shaq finished as a top 4 finalist in the MVP voting, a whopping 12 seasons apart, which very few legends can even claim. If it wasn't for Wilt Chamberlain, he would be universally recognized as the most dominant player in NBA history. And without question, he's one of the top 3 greatest finals performers of all time, which is, after all, where legacies are built. So at this point, I don't care if Shaq keeps disrespecting himself. If you want to authentically claim that you know basketball, then you'll stop disrespecting Shaquille O'Neal. Paul Anthony Pierce, an NBA champion and one of the great Celtics of basketball history. A couple years ago, in a statement that probably still haunts him to this day, Pierce said that he was a better player than Dwayne Wade, and most of the basketball community roasted him for it. But is it really as ridiculous as it sounds? Paul has been known to make a lot of bold claims in his time as an analyst, and in my opinion, this one was far from the craziest. Today, we're taking a look at the career, talent, and legacy of the Boston Celtics legend, and we'll start as we always do, by taking it back to the beginning of his career. Pierce was selected with the 10th overall pick in the 1998 NBA draft by the Boston Celtics. The 6'7" small forward didn't waste any time making his imprint on the league. He wasn't the most athletically gifted player, but he had many skills on offense. As he was an elite perimeter shooter, he was a good finisher around the rim, and he had a solid step-back jumper in the days where most players weren't using it. In his rookie season, he averaged 16.5 points, 6.4 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and 1.7 steals on 43.9% shooting. He also shot 41.2% from three-point range, which was the 11th best efficiency in the entire league. This season-long performance earned him a spot on the NBA's All-Rookie team. Boston was a very young and inexperienced team at this point, so they only finished with a 19-31 record in that lockout-shortened season. But their fortunes would soon turn around, right around the same time that Pierce would break out as a legitimate superstar. But not before he would experience one of the worst evenings of his life that would derail many individuals. On September 25th of the year 2000, at a Boston nightclub, 3 stupid and jealous individuals stabbed Paul Pierce 11 times in his face, his neck, and his back, and left him to die in a pool of his own blood. Fortunately, his teammate Tony Battie put Pierce in his car and rushed him to the hospital. The doctors were able to save Paul's life, but he had to have surgery to repair his collapsed lung. One of the stab wounds was just an inch away from hitting Paul's heart. Everyone would understand Paul needing a significant amount of time to recover, not just physically, but even mentally, as Paul dealt with ongoing PTSD from that evening. Despite the healing process and that traumatic experience, Pierce was still ready at the start of the NBA regular season just roughly a month later. Not only that, but he played all 82 games in that season, proving himself to be one of the toughest players the league has ever seen. One of the signature performances from that season came on March 13, 2001, against the defending champion Lakers in Staples Center. He was pretty much unstoppable, scoring in a variety of ways regardless of who was defending him. He put up 42 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 steals on 68.4% shooting. After the game, Lakers center Shaquille O'Neal was asked in an interview about Pierce's performance, and Shaq said, "Write this down. Paul Pierce is the mother effing truth." Since that day, Pierce's most iconic nickname has simply been The Truth. The following season, Pierce would lead his Celtics to their first playoff berth in nearly a decade, and he did it with monstrous numbers of 26.1 points, 6.9 rebounds, 3.2 assists, and 1.9 steals on 44.2% shooting. He was third in the league in overall three-point attempts, and yet he still shot 40.4% from that distance. He also led the entire league in total points that season. The tandem of Pierce and Antoine Walker led the Celtics to a 49-33 record, and they made it through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs before losing to the New Jersey Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games. This is the closest Pierce would get to the NBA Finals before the Boston Big Three assembled later in his career. With that being said, this period was actually the strongest point of his career from an individual standpoint. After a disappointing 06-07 campaign in which he dealt with injuries, Boston shook the basketball world by trading for both Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett. Naturally, all 3 superstars including Pierce took a step back in terms of individual production, but it was worth it for the overall team success that they were experiencing. The Celtics went from being a 24-win team in 2007 to a 66-win team in 2008, which was the greatest team improvement in NBA history. Pierce led his entire team in scoring and was once again named an All-Star. As most of you know, he led the Celtics to win the NBA championship over the Lakers in 6 games, and he was named the Finals MVP with his iconic performance coming in Game 1 where he returned from injury to seal the victory for Boston. More on this performance in a bit. The Celtics only won 1 championship in the Big Three era, but if they had been healthy, there's a great chance they would have won as many as 3 championships, as Kevin Garnett's knee injury caused him to miss all of the 2009 playoffs, and Kendrick Perkins missed Game 7 in the NBA Finals in 2010, which was a game where his rebounding and his help with interior defense may have been a determining factor. Regardless, throughout his Celtics days, and even into his days with Brooklyn and Washington, Pierce remained one of the most reliable and clutch shooters that the league had to offer. He finished out his career in 2017 as a member of the Los Angeles Clippers. Looking at his career as a whole, Pierce was a 10-time All-Star, he made 4 All-NBA teams, he's an NBA champion, and was the 2008 Finals MVP. I really think Pierce was a lot better than most people realize, and a big part of that is because his prime years came before the Big Three Celtics were formed. So many people are either too young to have seen his early years in Boston, or they just weren't paying attention at that point. His self-comparison to Dwayne Wade is a losing one in my opinion. Pierce does have a point that Wade had a lot more help to win his championships, and the help came a little too late for Pierce to win as many championships as he could have. Wade certainly was the better defender, as he's one of the best shot-blocking guards in NBA history who made 3 all-defense teams, but Pierce was also a significantly better three-point shooter than Wade ever was, and they were comparable scorers throughout their careers. Again, I think the answer is clearly Wade, but the comparison certainly wasn't as bad as a lot of people make it seem. To be honest, I've never seen one player innocently do more damage to their legacy than Paul Pierce has done to his own in recent years. Calling himself better than Dwayne Wade immediately invited criticism, and then the fact that he confessed his injury in the 2008 finals was really just a need for a bathroom break pretty much ruined the most iconic moment of his career. He later backtracked and said that he was joking, but unfortunately the damage to his legacy had already been done. Personally, I remember Paul Pierce as the truth, one of the most lethal scorers and dangerous shooters of his day. I remember him as the guy who didn't let 11 stab wounds stop him from playing out the NBA season and tearing up the rest of the league. Based on the perspective of the basketball community, he's extremely underrated. Based on Paul Pierce's view of himself in his own mind, he's extremely overrated. Let me know in the comments section where you rank Paul Pierce among the greatest Celtics in NBA history. Thanks. When people talk about the great power forwards of the early 2000s, 3 all-time great names usually come up, as they should: Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki. But one player who rarely gets mentioned who was competing at that elite level at that same position was the all-star Chris Webber, who for a variety of reasons gets overlooked among the great forwards of that era. Today, we're evaluating the legacy, talent, and overall career of Chris Webber, and we'll start as we always do by taking it back to the beginning of his career. Chris was drafted with the first overall pick in the 1993 NBA draft by the Orlando Magic, but was then immediately traded to the Golden State Warriors for Penny Hardaway and 3 future first-round picks. His talent earned him the first selection, as he was a quality scorer, a solid ball handler, and could rebound with the best of them, and those skills translated extremely well to the NBA level. With Webber added to the starting lineup, the Warriors became a winning team once again, on their way to the NBA playoffs. They went 50-32 throughout the regular season, and Webber was named that season's Rookie of the Year with averages of 17.5 points, 9.1 rebounds, 3.6 assists, and 2.2 blocks on 55.2% shooting. It was a strong first season that ultimately ended in a sweep to the defending Western Conference champions, the Phoenix Suns. Despite quickly approaching star status with his significant impact, not all was well within the Golden State organization. Head coach of the Warriors Don Nelson and Webber butted heads. Nelson had a history of coaching small ball lineups, so Nelson naturally moved the 6'9" Webber to the center position, which was a position Webber wasn't very comfortable playing. With Chris's ball handling skills, he wanted to be involved in the offense in more ways than simply standing in the paint and waiting for the ball to be dumped down to him. The issues left Webber wanting out of the situation, so he exercised his 1-year escape clause, and the Warriors agreed to a sign-and trade that sent him to the Washington Bullets. The Bullets were a team devoid of talent, and Chris would be a major addition in that aspect. But even though he would put up nice numbers in his first 2 seasons with the team, he also did it in limited time, as he dealt with significant injuries, playing in only 69 out of the 164 games. It wasn't until his 3rd season with Washington that Webber had a healthy season and broke out as an all-star. He averaged 20.1 points, 10.3 rebounds, 4.6 assists, and 1.9 blocks on 51.8% shooting. This was good enough to lead them to a 44-38 record and the 8th seed in the playoffs before they were eliminated by Jordan and the Bulls. Thanks to Webber, this was Washington's first playoff appearance in 9 seasons. By the summer of 1998, Webber had established himself as one of the better power forwards the league had to offer. But after failing once again to make a deep postseason run, Washington was ready to commit to a full rebuild, and traded Webber to a place where he would settle down and enjoy the prime of his career, the Sacramento Kings. With additional acquisitions of Peja Stojakovic, Vlade Divac, and Jason Williams, Sacramento was quickly building themselves a contender in the Western Conference. Webber would continue to improve his game as he led the league in rebounds in 1999 with 13 per game, which ended Dennis Rodman's streak of 7 straight seasons as the rebounding champion. Chris's prime season came in the 2000 to 2001 campaign, where the 27-year-old put up 27.1 points, 11.1 rebounds, 4.2 assists, and 1.7 blocks on 48.1% shooting. At this point, Webber was legitimately in the conversation of being the best power forward in the entire league. His 27.1 points per game is a higher average than Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, or Dirk Nowitzki have ever achieved. With these incredible numbers, Webber led Sacramento to a 55-27 season as he finished 4th overall in the league MVP race. They would go on to lose in the playoffs to Shaq and Kobe's Lakers for the second straight season, as their rivalry was continuing to heat up. But the following season appeared to be Webber's and the Sacramento Kings' year. As a Lakers fan who hates to admit this, I can say that the 2002 Kings had a beautiful and unselfish style of team basketball, as they had 7 players who averaged double-digit scoring over the course of the season. Webber once again did his part, as he put up solid numbers throughout the season, leading the Kings to a 61-21 record, which was easily the best record in franchise history. After handily beating the Utah Jazz and the Dallas Mavericks in the first 2 rounds, the stage was set for the game's biggest rivals to square off for the 3rd straight season. Lakers, Kings, best of 7. At this point, everyone who followed the NBA closely knew that this was the real NBA championship. The Western Conference was superior in talent to the Eastern Conference, and it didn't matter who represented the East in the finals. Both the Lakers and the Kings would destroy them. Over the series, Webber did lead the Kings in turnovers and made several crucial blunders in critical moments, which I'll touch on more later. But overall, he had a monster series, putting up strong all-around numbers. This would be a classic 7-game series for the ages, but unfortunately, it may also be the most controversial series of NBA history. The Lakers would win this series in overtime of the 7th game, but many people think it shouldn't have even got to that point. Sacramento was leading the series 3-2 when Game 6 had numerous questionable calls throughout the game that was going almost entirely in the Lakers' favor. It seemed just like bad refereeing at the time, but it turns out it was probably much more than just that. Years later, NBA referee Tim Donaghy was convicted and sent to prison for illegal gambling, as he bet on NBA games that he refereed. Donaghy has since said that the league had an agenda to have the Lakers win Game 6. Whether or not you believe this statement is up to you. Based on this information, Chris Webber should be an NBA champion and be known as the man who is the best player on the team that ended the Shaq and Kobe dynasty. This is another reason why Chris Webber's legacy is overlooked, although I don't think it should be. After this point, Webber would continue to be an effective and elite player for several years, but he would begin to deal with more and more injuries and would never quite get as close to the mountaintop as he did with the Kings in 2002. He closed out his career playing with Philadelphia, Detroit, and the Golden State Warriors. Looking at the totality of his career, Webber was a 5-time All-Star, he made 5 All-NBA teams, was the 1994 Rookie of the Year, and was the 1999 Rebounding Champion. Overall, he was a solid scorer, could bang down low, but also had a quality mid-range jumper. He was a terrific rebounder and was one of the best passing big men of his era. In my opinion, Webber had the perfect storm of circumstances for being a great player who gets overlooked in history. For one, he should have been an NBA champion, but he wasn't. Second, he was a bit of a journeyman who spent the majority of his career playing for less prestigious teams. And 3, he didn't play long enough to rank very high on the all-time lists. Not everything about Webber's game was fantastic though. He was a player who was known to make many crucial errors and mistakes when it counted. After all, one of his most famous plays of his career was actually from his college days with the Michigan Wolverines, when he called a timeout in the final moments when his team didn't have any. This resulted in a technical foul, possession going to North Carolina, and ultimately caused his team to lose the national championship game. Some of these mental lapses continued into his basketball career, as he made many costly turnovers, like I alluded to from the 2002 West Finals. And I even remember an instance in the playoffs where he already had a technical foul and was visibly upset and nearly got ejected by picking up his second one when Kobe Bryant tried to calm him down so that he could stay in the game. That's right. His opponent tried to get him to keep his cool so that he could remain in the game for what was, at the time, the biggest game of his life. Regardless of his judgment issues in key moments, Webber was still an overall all-time great at his position. He had a higher career scoring average than Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett, and he had a higher assist per game average than Duncan, Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki. I wouldn't rank him higher on the all-time list than Duncan, Dirk, or Garnett,
but at the very least, he belongs in that class of great big men. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.